Hey guys, tonight we are going to trade in our comfortable beds for a swinging hammock, and the gentle hum of your refrigerator for the creak of timber and the lash of salty waves. We're stepping back in time to the Golden Age of Piracy. But before you get any romantic notions of being a swashbuckling hero like Captain Jack Sparrow, let me just say this based on the reality of what we're about to explore. You probably wouldn't survive the first week without begging to be returned to your boring desk job. The smell alone would be a formidable foe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And for a bit of fun, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always cool to see where in the world our little community is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is, let's say, 1716. The air in this dingy port town tavern is thick with the smell of stale beer, sweat, and cheap tobacco smoke. You're nursing a lukewarm drink, trying to make it last. Your back aches from your last voyage on a merchant vessel, where the captain was a tyrant and the pay was a pittance. Or maybe you were a farmer, and your crops failed for the third year in a row. Or perhaps you were an indentured servant, sold into years of labor for the price of passage to the new world, only to find it a different kind of prison. Whatever your story, the theme is the same: life is hard, monotonous, and crushingly unfair. The future looks like an endless stretch of the same gray road. Then, he sits down at your table. He doesn't ask. He just pulls up a chair, a grin on his face. Missing a tooth or two, he smells of salt and something else. Confidence. He and his companions are louder, freer than anyone else in this tavern. They pay for their rounds with a clatter of silver coins that makes your own few pennies feel pathetic. He starts talking, not to you directly at first, but to the air, to anyone who will listen. He talks of a different life, a life at sea, yes, but not the one you know, not under the whip of a Royal Navy boatswain, nor the thumb of a stingy merchant captain. He talks of a life of liberty. This is the core of the pirate's promise, the great recruitment pitch of the era. This was the so-called Golden Age of Piracy, a period roughly from the 1650 seconds to the 1730 seconds. A surprising number of pirates weren't born criminals, they were made. They were experienced sailors, veterans of the Navy and merchant fleets who were simply fed up. They were tired of the brutal discipline, the miserable food, the stolen wages, and the constant threat of being abandoned, sick or injured, in some foreign port thousands of miles from home. Piracy wasn't just a career choice for many, it was an act of rebellion. The man across the table leans in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He talks of striking the articles. This isn't some vague promise, it's a contract. Before you even join the crew, you get a say. You get to vote for your captain. You get an equal share of all plunder, no exceptions. A common pirate saying was no prey, no pay. You were a shareholder in a flooding, very aggressive enterprise. He tells you of the rules for compensation: lose a right arm in battle, you get 600 pieces of 8. And I 100 pieces of 8. It's all written down, agreed upon by the whole crew. It's a form of democracy and social insurance that is utterly alien to the world you currently inhabit. This is where you encounter a curious little detail of pirate life that shatters the total chaos myth. Many pirate articles, like those of Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts, had surprisingly strict rules. For instance, lights and candles were to be put out at 8 p.m. If you wanted to keep drinking after hours, you had to do it on the open deck, in the dark. No gambling with cards or dice was allowed on many ships. And a rule that seems almost comically prudent: every man was to keep his cutlass and pistols clean and ready for action at all times. It was a society with its own rigid structure, designed for maximum efficiency in their chosen raid. You look at your calloused hands, at the worn-out leather of your shoes. You think of the endless days of back-breaking work for next to nothing. And then you look at this man, radiating a sense of defiant freedom. Of course, he doesn't mention the scurvy. He doesn't talk about the weevils and the biscuits or the dysentery that can sweep through a crew. He sells you the dream, not the gritty, foul-smelling reality. And here lies a question that historians still debate. What was the primary driver for men like you to turn pirate? Was it purely economic desperation and a reaction to the oppressive labor conditions of the time, making piracy a form of social revolt? Or was it also driven by a deeper psychological need, a desire for fame, notoriety, and a life of thrilling, unrestrained liberty? Even if it was brutal and short as you sit there, you probably don't even know the answer yourself. Are you running from a life of misery, or are you running towards a life of adventure? Maybe it's a bit of both. The pirate claps you on the shoulder. So, what say you? Led a short life and a merry one, or a long life of servitude? He stands up, ready to leave. The choice is yours. Stay here in the grime and the certainty of your bleak future, or step out into the night and walk towards the dark shape of a ship bobbing in the harbor. You push your chair back, the scraping sound lost in the tavern's noise. You decide to take the chance. You will follow him towards the promise of the Black Flag. You follow the pirate out of the taverns, refugee and into the cool, damp air of the harbor night. The transition is a brief relief. The path is muddy, a treacherous mix of earth and things you'd rather not identify, but the salty breeze feels clean on your face. It carries the sounds of the port water lapping against wooden pilings, the distant shout of a watchman, and the lonely creak of a ship straining against its anchor lines. This is the last bit of solid ground you'll feel for a while. You're relayed to a small, shabby-looking rowboat, a dinghy, bobbing impatiently by a set of stone steps slick with algae. Two other men, silent and grim, are already waiting. The journey to your new home is short but transformative. With each pull of the oars, the familiar lights and sounds of the town recede, and the dark, imposing shape of the ship grows larger. It's not the grand, multi-decked galleon you might have imagined from fanciful tales. It's smaller, leaner, more like a predator. It's likely a sloop, a single-masted vessel prized by pirates for its speed and agility. This is a quartet of pirate operations. You don't build ships. You acquire them. You take a sturdy merchant sloop, something designed to haul cargo, and you modify it. You strip away any unnecessary cabins or structures on the deck to make more room for cannons and, more importantly, for a larger fighting crew. It's a vessel brutally repurposed for a single-function violent acquisition. As you get closer, you see it's not just functional, it's scarred. The hull is a patchwork of repairs. The wood is dark, not with fresh paint, but with grime, soot, and endless coats of tar. You reach for the rope ladder hanging down its side, and your hand comes away sticky. The rope is stiff and coarse, saturated with tar to protect it from the constant assault of salt water. You begin to climb, the ship looming over you. The moment you heave yourself over the railing and your feet touch the deck, the sensory experience you had on land is utterly eclipsed. You have now entered a new world, defined by its atmosphere. The dominant smell, the one that coats the back of your throat, is tar. It's the ship's lifeblood. A thick, black pinter used to caulk the seams between the wooden planks of the deck and hull. The process called paying. The phrase "the devil to pay" actually comes from this. The devil was the longest and most difficult seam of the hull to caulk. So when there was the devil to pay, it meant a miserable job was ahead, and that smell is baked into every fiber of this vessel. But the tar is just the base note of a complex, layered perfume. Beneath it is the ever-present damp, woody scent of the ship itself, constantly groaning and flexing like a living creature. Then comes the acrid tang of stale bilge water, the foul, stagnant cocktail that sloshes in the very bottom of the ship, a mix of seawater, leaks, spilled cargo, and anything else that finds its way down there. And riding on top of it all is the most human smell, the potent, unwashed odor of several dozen men living in close, cramped quarters, combined with the faint, Sweetish scent of rot from food stores that are just beginning to turn. This is the air you will breathe from now on. You stand there, trying not to look like the rookie you are, and you take in your new home. It feels both chaotic and strangely ordered. Ropes are coiled with a sailor's precision. Cannons are lashed securely, but the deck itself is stained and worn. You might notice the wood has a strange, riddled appearance in places, almost like a disease. This is the work of the shipworm, a creature that haunted every wooden vessel of the age. It wasn't a worm at all, but a bizarre, long-bodied saltwater clam that would bore tunnels through any submerged timber. A ship's hull could be silently eaten away from the inside out. To fight this, crews had to periodically careen the ship, run it aground in a shallow, quiet bay, pull it onto its side, and painstakingly scrape the entire hull free of barnacles and worms, then recoat it with a protective layer of tar and tallow. It was a back-breaking, essential process, a constant war against decay. Eamon bumps past you, not unkindly, but without apology. He, like the others you see, is a gallery of survival. His face is a road map of sun and hardship. His clothes are a mismatched collection, likely taken from the very merchant ships this crew has plundered. A fine gentleman's waistcoat, now stained and torn, is worn over a simple sailor's shirt. There is no uniform here but utility. Here, you bump into a question that maritime historians still puzzle over: the exact manning of a pirate vessel. Unlike a naval or merchant ship with a strict hierarchy and designated crew numbers, a pirate ship's population could fluctuate wildly. Some accounts suggest that successful pirate captains would pack their ships with as many men as possible, believing that overwhelming numbers work to intimidating victims into surrendering without a fight. This would have made the already squalid conditions almost unbearable. Other historians argue that a smart captain, like a good manager, would have known that an overcrowded ship burns through food and water too quickly and breeds conflict. They suggest a more calculated balance was sought. Enough men to fight, but not so many as to cripple the vessel with their own needs. Looking around at the faces on this deck, you have to wonder which philosophy your new captain follows. Is this floating piece of wood dangerously overcrowded, or just uncomfortably full? The man who recruited you, your only friendly face in this sea of strangers, points you towards a stack of coiled rope. Stay here. Don't touch anything, he grunts, before disappearing into the throng. You are a guest here, and a probationary one at that. The ship begins to stir. You hear the rhythmic clanking of the capstan as men begin to haul up the anchor. A deep groan runs through the deck as the sails catch the wind. Your life as a pirate has begun. You have traded your future for a plank of wood floating on an endless ocean. The ship is now underway, a self-contained world gliding through the darkness. The familiar outlines of the coast have dissolved into a smudge on the horizon, and you're surrounded by the vast, indifferent emptiness of the sea. It's here, in the relative quiet between moments of action, that your senses begin to adjust and dissect the environment in more detail. Your brain, no longer overwhelmed by the initial shock, starts to categorize the sensory inputs, specifically the smells. You've already identified the dominant note star: damp wood, bilge water, and unwashed humanity. But now, you start to notice the subtleties, the underlying currents of odor that tell a deeper story about life and decay. On this vessel, you are, whether you like it or not, becoming a connoisseur of stench. Let's start with the most organic sources. The ship is made of wood, and wood, especially in a constantly wet environment, is alive with microbial activity. There's a perpetual, faint scent of mildew, a damp, earthy smell that clings to the sails and the ropes, and seems to seep from the very walls of the lower decks. It's the smell of a forest floor, but without any of its fresh, pleasant qualities. It's the smell of slow, inexorable rot. Then there's the animal life, and I don't just mean the crew. Many pirate ships, when they could, kept live animals on board for fresh meat. you might catch the faint but distinct smell of chickens or a goat crammed into a small pen somewhere on the crowded deck. Their waste, combined with their own animal odor, adds a sharp, ammoniable tang to the general miasma, especially when the wind shifts in your direction. This practice, while providing a welcome break from salted meat, was a double-edged sword, as the animals required their own share of the ship's precious fresh water. And of course, there are the rats. You haven't seen them yet, but you can smell their presence. It's a musty, greasy odor that seems to emanate from the darkest corners of the hold. They are the unseen passengers, a thriving civilization living within the walls of your own. And their scent is a constant reminder that you are never truly alone. Now, let's move on to the provisions. The food and drink on a pirate ship were a constant source of olfactory interest. The water was oft unstored in wooden casks for weeks or months on end. Over time, it would become stagnant and slimy with algae, developing a swampy, vegetal stench. When a crewman dips a ladle into the scuttle, but the main water cask, on deck the smell that wafts up is enough to make you wince. This is why sailors of all stripes, not just pirates, preferred to drink beer, grog, or wine. The alcohol acted as a preservative and, more importantly, masked the foul taste and smell of the water it was oft unmixed with. The food had its own aromatic signature. The staple, hardtack, was a simple, unleavened biscuit baked until it was as hard as a rock. When fresh, it had a neutral, floury smell, but it was rarely fresh. It was famously susceptible to weevil infestations, and sailors would often tap their biscuits on the table before eating to knock the insects out. A sack of infested hardtack would give off a faint, dusty, and slightly acrid smell. Salted meat, the other pillar of the nautical diet, was stored in barrels of brine. When it was good, it just smelled intensely of salt, but if the brine wasn't strong enough or the meat was poorly preserved, it would develop the truly horrific smell of putrefaction that could condemn an entire barrel. Opening a bad barrel of meat was an event that could ruin the day for everyone on board. This brings us to one of the oddest and most debated little details of pirate life: the use of spices. Historians have long noted that pirates, when plundering ships from the East Indies, would often keep the caches of valuable spices like cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon for themselves. The traditional argument is that they used these powerful spices to mask the taste of rotting food. A bit of nutmeg could make rancid pork slightly more palatable. It's a plausible theory. However, some food historians now argue that this might be an exaggeration. They propose that these men, having come from a world where such spices were the ultimate luxury, kept them for the same reason they kept silk or silver, because they were treasure. Using them was a way to live like a king, even if just for a meal. The act of sprinkling nutmeg on your salted beef was a defiant gesture, a way of saying, I am a free man, and I eat like one. The truth, as is often the case, probably lies somewhere in between. They were both a practical tool and a status symbol. Finally, you have the most complex and pervasive smell of all the human element. This isn't just the simple smell of sweat. It's a cocktail created by dozens of bodies living in a state of perpetual uncleanliness. It's the smell of skin that hasn't been washed with fresh water in months, coated in a film of salt, sweat, and grime. It's the smell of clothes stiff with filth. Add to this the smell of sickness, the sour breath of scurvy, the foulness of dysentery. Then there's the scent of their habits, the sharp smoke of clay pipes packed with cheap, strong tobacco, and the sweet, heavy smell of spilled rum and grog that soaks into the deck planks, forever fermenting. And there's another, more visceral smell: blood. After a battle, the metallic, coppery scent of blood would linger on the deck for days. No matter how much they swabbed it with seawater, it would mix with the tar and the salt. The grim reminder of the violence that was the very foundation of this life. You stand on that deck, taking it all in. You realize that this ship is a living archive of its own history, told not in words, but in smells. Every scent tells a story of survival, of decay, of desperation, and of small, defiant luxuries. This isn't just an unpleasant odor, it's the very soul of the vessel. And you are now a part of it. It's a smell you'll never forget, even if you manage to survive long enough to one day smell clean air again. The initial disorientation of being at sea begins to fade, replaced by the dull rhythm of shipboard routine. The man who recruited you, whose name you learn is Blackwood, gives you a rough shove. Time to see your new quarters. He grumbles and leads you towards a hatch in the middle of the deck. He pulls it open, and a wave of hot, stagnant air washes over you. It's like lifting the lid off a pot that's been simmering for far too long. The smell you've been experiencing on deck is a pale, diluted version of what greets you now. This is the concentrated essence of the ship, and it's almost a physical blur. You climb down a steep, narrow ladder into the dim, cavernous space below. This is the tween deck, the area between the main deck and the cargo hold. In a merchant ship, this space would be filled with barrels, crates, and bales of goods. On this pirate's loop, it has been converted into the crew's living quarters. And when I say living quarters, I mean it in the most generous sense of the word. The space is low silencing. You have to stoop to avoid hitting your head on the massive wooden beams that support the deck above. The only light comes from the open hatch you just ascended through, and perhaps a single, swinging lantern casting log, dancing shadows. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you begin to make out the details. Dozens of hammocks are strung up, crisscrossing each other in a chaotic web. They are so close together that a man turning over in his sleep would bump into his neighbors on either side. There is no concept of personal space here. This is a communal womb of filth and discomfort. This is where you will sleep, eat, and spend any time you are not on watch. Your roommates are the 50, 60, maybe even 70 other men who make up this crew. They are a motley collection, a cross-section of the Atlantic's desperate and dispossessed. You see weather-dulled sailors with faces like sea charts, and boys who look barely old enough to shave. You see men of different nationalities, their accents a jumble in the close air, and they are all, without exception, filthy. Their clothes are the same ones they wear on deck, the same ones they work in, and the same ones they've probably been wearing for months. They are stained with tar, food, and who knows what else. Their skin carries a sheen of sweat and grime. Their hair is matted with salt. The very air is thick with their collective exhalations. A human effigy that is warm, damp, and suffocating. And then you notice the other inhabitants, the true, permanent residents of the tween deck. As your eyes scan the floor, you see movement in the shadows. The rat, bold as brass, scurries along a beam, then another. The ship is teeming with them. They are a constant presence, a plague that every ship of the era had to endure. They contaminate food stores, gnaw through ropes and sails, and carry disease. Some crews would try to control them by bringing cats or terriers on board, but it was a losing battle. The rats always won. Then you feel a tiny prickle on your ankle. You look down. A flea. You brush it away. But you know it's a futile gesture. The hammocks, the bedding if you can call it thin, greasy blanket that the very wood of the ship is infested with lice, fleas, and bedbugs. They live in the seams of your clothes and in your hair. The constant, low-level torment of their bites will become a part of your daily existence. You will see men absently scratching, their skin a canvas of red welts and sores. This brings up a fascinatedly disgusting tidbit of historical hygiene. In an environment totally devoid of modern insecticides, how did sailors deal with this constant parasitic assault? One common method was to take their shirts and blankets and hold them over a smoky fire. A process they called SMO using. The smoke would drive the lice out, or at least stun them, and the men would pick them off. Another, more desperate method was to turn their shirts inside out. This wouldn't get rid of the lice, but for a short while, It would take the little pests time to crawl back to the side with the skin. It was a temporary, psychological victory in a war they could never truly win. Historians still debate the efficacy of these methods, but they paint a vivid picture of the relentless battle against vermin. You are assigned a hammock-stained, greasy piece of canvas that smells of its previous occupant. As you try to find a place to stow the pitifully small bundle of your worldly possessions, you realize there is no storage. There are no lockers, no chests of drawers. Your few belongings must be kept with you. In your hammock, at all times, anything left lying around is considered communal property by default. The lack of privacy is absolute. You will hear every cough, every snore, every muttered nightmare when sickness sweeps through the ship. As it inevitably will, this cramped space will become an incubator. A single man with dysentery or fever can quickly infect a dozen others. There is no sick bay, no quarantine. The sick and the healthy are crammed in together, breathing the same contaminated air. You start to understand the psychological toll of such an existence. It's not just the physical discomfort. It's the complete and total erosion of personal dignity, stripped of privacy, of cleanliness, of quiet. A person can change. The constant noise, the stench, the physical proximity to so many others, it could grind him down, making him irritable, aggressive, and perhaps more prone to the kind of explosive violence that piracy required. Some historians argue that this brutal environment was a key factor in shaping the pirate mindset. It wasn't a ship of jolly rogues, it was a floating powder keg of stressed, uncomfortable, and often sick men. The promise of treasure had to be incredibly powerful to make this daily reality even remotely bearable. Blackwood claps you on the back again, a gesture you're starting to dislike. Get some rest if you can. You're on the dawn watch. He leaves you there, a solitary figure in a writhing mass of humanity. You look at your hammock, at the men sleeping fitfully around you, at the shadows where the rats play. This is your new home. This is the community you have joined. And as you lie down for the first time, the overpowering stench of the place enveloping you like a shroud, you can't help but wonder if the black flag was worth it after all. In the first few days, you try to find your footing, to understand the unwritten rules that govern this floating society. You quickly learn that the most important document on this ship isn't a map or a charter from a king, but the pirate code, or the Articles of Agreement. You were told about it back in the tavern, but now you see it in practice. Before you're even allowed a full share, you must formally agree to it, sometimes by signing your name or making your mark in a communal ledger, other times by swearing an oath on a Bible, a hatchet, or even a human skull for dramatic effect. These articles are the bedrock of pirate democracy. They lay out the rules of engagement, the distribution of plunder, and the punishments for infractions. You see how every man, from the captain down to the newest recruit like yourself, is bound by them. The captain is elected and can be deposed by a majority vote if he proves to be a coward, a tyrant, or simply incompetent. The quartermaster, often the real power on the ship when not in battle, is also elected and acts as a sort of tribunal judge and public advocate, ensuring every man gets his fair share and has his grievances heard. It's a shockingly egalitarian system for its time. You see the compensation system at work after a minor skirmish with a small merchant vessel. Eamon loses 2 fingers on his left hand to a splinter from a cannonball strike. The quartermaster consults the articles and solemnly promises him his due, perhaps 100 pieces of 8 from the very next prize taken. It's a brutal but clear-cut form of workers' compensation. But as you observe this surprisingly orderly social contract, you notice a glaring omission. The articles are incredibly detailed about treasure, weapons, and discipline. They might forbid fighting amongst the crew on board the ship. Disputes were to be settled ashore with pistol and cutlass. They might dictate the precise share of loot for the ship's carpenter or musician. Bartholomew Roberts' famous code even had an article about keeping your weapons clean and ready. Yet, In all this talk of order and regulation, there is absolutely nothing about personal hygiene. There is no article that says, "Thou shalt wash." There is no rule demanding that living quarters be kept clean. There is no regulation about waste disposal or managing sickness. The Pirate Code, this great document of maritime rebellion, simply doesn't care if you smell like a dead goat. This reveals a fundamental truth about the pirate mindset in the era in general. The concept of hygiene as we know it, the link between germs, dirt, and disease did not exist. Sickness was believed to be caused by bad air miasma, an imbalance of the body's humors, or simply the will of God. Eamon didn't get sick because his drinking water was contaminated with fecal matter. He got sick because the air in the tropics was foul and humid. Therefore, being personally dirty wasn't seen as a health risk. It was just a state of being. You see this attitude everywhere. Men will relieve themselves over the side of the ship, wherever is convenient. They spit tobacco juice freely onto the deck, where it mixes with the grime. They handle food with hands that are black with tar and rope dust. The idea that their own filth could be the source of their misery is a connection that is never made. Their focus is on the external and the immediate, the condition of the ship, the direction of the wind, the readiness of their cannons. The internal, microscopic world of germs is a complete mystery. This leads to a strange contradiction. A pirate crew would be obsessively clean in one very specific area, their weapons. You see men spending hours polishing their cutlasses, cleaning the flintlock mechanisms of their pistols, ensuring their powder is dry. A rusty sword or a misfiring pistol could mean death in a battle. Their survival depended on the reliability of their tools. Yet, the same man who meticulously cares for his pistol will sleep in a flea-bit unhammock indeed with unwashed hands without a second thought. The connection between personal cleanliness and personal survival simply hasn't been forged. Historians have often puzzled over this dichotomy. How could a society so focused on rules and survival ignore something so fundamental? The debate often centers on whether this was a uniquely pirate trait or simply a reflection of the 18th century as a whole. While it's true that hygiene standards were low everywhere, even in the palaces of Europe, life at sea concentrated these issues to a lethal degree. On land, you had more space, more access to fresh water, and a more varied diet. On a ship, you were wrapped in a cramped, enclosed system where filth and disease could recycle and amplify with terrifying speed. So while pirates weren't necessarily dirtier than the poorest laborers on land, the consequences of their lack of hygiene are more immediate and deadly. You witness a small, telling example of this. A cask of salted beef is opened and found to be slightly off, with a slick, greasy film and a faint, sour smell. On a naval or merchant vessel with a strict hierarchy, the captain or quartermaster might condemn the barrel, casting it overboard to prevent sickness. But here, the decision-making is more democratic and more desperate. An argument breaks out. Some men, their stomachs growling, argue it's perfectly fine to eat. Others, perhaps with a more sensitive nose, argue it will make everyone sick. The quartermaster lets them debate. In the end, hunger wins. They decide to cook it, hoping that a good boiling will cleanse it. They aren't wrong in principle. Heat does kill bacteria, but their understanding is based on folk wisdom, not science. They are rolling the dice with their collective digestive tracts. You realize that the pirate code wasn't designed to create a healthy society. It was designed to create an effective fighting force. Its purpose was to minimize internal conflict and maximize profit. As long as a man could fight, it didn't matter what he smelled like. As long as he didn't bring conflict to the ship, his personal habits were his own business. The code managed the social health of the crew, not their physical health. And in the cramped, stinking world of a pirate ship, this was an oversight that would have deadly consequences for everyone on board. The sun is just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale rose. The air is cool and damp, the quietest part of the day at sea. But a certain biological imperative is making itself known, a call that cannot be ignored. It's time for what you might euphemistically call your morning ritual. You ask one of the seasoned sailors, a grizzled man named Finch, where one goes to relieve oneself. He just grins, showing a few brown teeth, and points towards the very front of the ship. To the head, wed, mind your step. You make your way forward, stumbling over ropes and sleeping bodies on the deck. You're heading for the bowsprit, the long spar that juts out from the front of the ship. Below the bowsprit is a small, graded platform, or sometimes just a set of carved, wooden seats suspended over the open ocean. This area is called the head. The name is practical since most sailing ships were downwind sailors. The wind would usually blow from the back of the ship towards the front, carrying the foul smells away from the main deck and the captain's quarters, which were typically at the stern. It was the most logical and least offensive place for the ship's toilets. As you get closer, the fresh sea air takes on a distinctly ammoniable sharpness. This area is perpetually damp, not just from the ocean spray, but from its constant, intended use. You reach the head, and you see it's not a private stall, it's a communal space. There might be 2 or 3 openings, side by side, with no partitions, no doors, nothing. You will be taking care of your business in full view of anyone else who happens to be there or walking by on the deck. Modesty is yet another luxury you have left behind on shore. You find a spot and carefully position yourself. This is a precarious business. The ship is constantly in motion, rolling with the swell of the waves. You have to brace yourself, holding on tightly to a rope or a wooden rail to avoid being pitched into the sea. Below you, the ocean churns. The waves that crash against the bows end up plumes of cold, salty spray. This is your flushing mechanism. There is no toilet paper. Of course, the most common tool for cleaning oneself was a frayed piece of rope, left dangling into the sea. When you were done, you de-use the rope, then drop it back into the water for the ocean to clean it for the next person. This communal rope was known as the towing rag or whipping rag. The thought of it is enough to make your stomach clench. This is where you encounter a particularly miserable little fact of nautical life in rough weather. The head became a place of genuine peril. If the sea was choppy, you were guaranteed a constant, thorough drenching with cold seawater. In a storm, trying to use the head was to risk being swept overboard. During such times, sailors would have to resort to using buckets or just finding a sheltered corner on the deck, further contributing to the general filth of the vessel, and for the poor soul suffering from dysentery, a condition pirates called the bloody flux. This journey to the head became a frequent, agonizing, and deeply humiliating ordeal. This lack of proper sanitation was the single greatest contributor to the spread of disease on any ship of the era. The constant fecal contamination, washed across the head and bow by the waves, created a breeding ground for bacteria. Men's hands and clothes would be soiled, and they would then handle food, ropes, and tools, spreading contamination throughout the ship. They didn't understand the germ theory, but they lived with its brutal consequences every single day. Historians who study maritime health often debate the chicken or egg nature of shipboard diseases. Did poor sanitation directly cause the outbreaks of dysentery and typhoid? Or did malnutrition, especially scurvy, weaken the sailors' immune systems so much that they became susceptible to germs that a healthy person might have fought off? The most likely answer is that it was a vicious cycle. Malnutrition weakened the body, and poor sanitation provided the pathogens that attacked it. One problem amplified the other, creating a perfect storm of sickness and misery. As you finish your business, you feel a profound sense of vulnerability. There is something deeply unsettling about being perched over the abyss, completely exposed to the elements and the eyes of your crewmates. It's a daily reminder of your precarious existence. You are a tiny speck on a vast ocean, your life held together by rotting wooden fraying ropes. And even your most basic human functions are fraught with difficulty and danger. You make your way back to the main deck, feeling the cold spray on your legs. You see other men, their faces grim, heading in the direction you just came from. There is no conversation, no acknowledgement. It's a shared misery that needs no words. You think about the simple, profound luxury of a private outhouse on land, a small, enclosed space that offered a moment of solitude. Here, there is no solitude. There is no privacy. There is only the endless, rolling sea and the constant, close-packed presence of other men. You look down at your hands. They are grimy from the ropes you held on to. A short while later, you'll be handed your morning ration of hardtack, and you won't think twice about picking it up with these same hands. The cycle of contamination continues, silent and unseen. The head is more than just a toilet. It's the epicenter of the ship's invisible war against itself, a war that the pirates, for all their cannons and cutlasses, were destined to lose. Weeks bleed into one another, marked only by the changing phases of the moon and the endless cycle of watch shifts. Your life has found its rhythm, a monotonous loop of work, sleep, and waiting. You are becoming a seasoned sailor, if not yet a hardened pirate. You can't tie knots with your eyes closed, climb the rigging in a stiff breeze, and you no longer feel seasick. You've also adapted to the filth in ways that would have horrified the person you were on land. You've learned to ignore the smell, to sleep through the noise, and to coexist with the rats and lice. You are also still wearing the same clothes you had on when you first boarded the ship. Your shirt, once a respectable enough linen garment, is now a sort of grayish-brown color. Its original shade a distant memory. It's stiff with salt, sweat, and accumulated grime. Your breeches are frayed at the knees and stained with tar that will never, ever come out. Your shoes, if you still have them, are cracked and brittle from the constant exposure to salt water. Many of your shipmates have long since abandoned footwear altogether, their bare feet calloused and tough as old leather. You look around at the crew. There is no uniform, only a shared state of raggedness. A man might be wearing a fine silk waistcoat plundered from a prize, but it will be worn over a shirt that is literally rotting off his back. Clothes are a resource, just like food or water, and they are used until they are no longer functional. A tear is mended with clumsy stitches. A lost button is replaced with a knot or piece of twine. A garment is only discarded when it disintegrates completely. The concept of doing laundry is utterly alien on this vessel. The primary reason is the scarcity of fresh water. Every drop of fresh water on board is strictly rationed for drinking. To use it for washing clothes would be an unthinkable waste, an offense punishable by the crew's scorn. Or worse, you simply cannot spare the most precious resource on the ship for the luxury of a clean shirt. But what about using seawater? This is a common question, and the answer reveals a bit of basic chemistry that every sailor understood instinctively. If you wash clothes in salt water and then let them dry, the salt remains behind, embedded in the fabric. This salt then attracts moisture from the air, meaning your clothes will never, ever be truly dry. They will be perpetually damp, clammy, and abrasive. Wearing salt-stiffened clothes against your skin is a recipe for chafing, rashes, and painful sores. So washing with salt water was often worse than not washing at all. This leads to a peculiar and rather disgusting little piece of maritime folklore, the belief that clothes cleaned themselves. Some sailors held that after a certain point of saturation with sweat and grease, the garment would form a sort of protective, waterproof layer. They believed that this greasy patina actually repelled further dirt and even protected them from the cold and wet. This is, of course, complete nonsense from a scientific perspective, but it's a fascinating example of how people create justifications for the necessities of their situation. If you can't wash your clothes, you might as well convince yourself that not washing them is actually a good thing. Historians who study the material culture of sailors often debate the psychological impact of this enforced filthiness. Did being constantly dirty and dragged contribute to the outlaw identity of pirates when you look and feel like an outcast? It might be easier to act like one. Some argue that abandoning the conventions of dress was a conscious part of rejecting mainstream society. It was a visible sign that you were no longer bound by the rules of the land. Others take a more practical view, suggesting it was simply a matter of necessity, in that pirates, like any other sailors of the time, would have gladly worn clean clothes if they had the chance. When they captured a ship, fresh clothing was often as prized a part of the plunder as coin or cargo. The chance to discard a rotting, vermin-infested shirt for a clean one was a moment of pure, unadulterated luxury. The consequences of wearing filthy clothes day in and day out are not just aesthetic. The grime and sweat create the perfect environment for bacteria and fungi to thrive. Skin infections are rampant. You see men with angry red boils, weeping sores, and persistent rashes in the places where their clothes rub the most under the arms, around the neck, and in the groin. These minor ailments, in a world without antibiotics or proper hygiene, could easily become major, life-threatening infections. Your own skin has become a constant source of low-level misery. It itches, perpetually. The combination of the lice, the flea bites, and the chafing from your stiff, dirty clothes creates a torment that you can never quite escape. You learn the sailor's trick of scratching yourself with a marlin's pike or the back of a knife, as your own fingernails are too dirty to risk breaking the skin. One day, leaning against a rail, you look down at your shirt sleeve. It's so caked with filth that it has the texture of canvas. You try to remember what it felt like to put on a clean shirt, the simple pleasure of soft, dry fabric against your skin. The memory is faint, like a dream from another life. You have become one with your clothes. And they, in turn, have become a second skin, a stiff, smelly, and profoundly uncomfortable one. This is your uniform now, the uniform of the damned, the desperate, and the profoundly unwashed. The bell on deck chimes, signaling the change of watch and, more importantly, the distribution of the day's main meal. The excitement is palpable. Food, no matter how poor, is a welcome break in the monotony. The ship's cook, a one-legged man named Silas who also serves as the ship's carpenter, a common and terrifying combination, begins to ladle a lumpy, nondescript into wooden bowls. But the main course, the foundation of this meal and every other, is already in your hand. It's a biscuit. This isn't the soft, flaky biscuit you might imagine. This is hardtack. It's also known as a ship's biscuit, sea bread, or, more poetically, a molar breaker. The recipe is brutally simple: flour, water, and maybe a little salt. No yeast, no shortening, no flavor. The dough is mixed and then baked for, sometimes even 5 times until it is utterly devoid of moisture. The result is a dense, hard, brick-like cracker that is, in theory, indestructible. Its sole virtue is its longevity. Properly stored, hardtack could last for months or even years, making it the perfect staple for long ocean voyages. You hold the square slab in your hand. It feels heavier than it looks. You try to take a bite. This is your first mistake. Biting directly into a piece of hardtack is a good way to lose a tooth. The older sailors chuckle at your rookie move. You quickly learn the proper technique. You have to break it into smaller pieces, usually by smashing it against the deck or with the handle of your knife. Then, you must soak the pieces in whatever liquid you have available: grog, beer, water, or the stew in your bowl until it's offense enough to be chewed. As you dunk a chunk of the biscuit into your stew, you notice something floating to the surface. It's a small, black beetle. You flick it away, but then another appears, and another. Your stew now has several little black specks circling in it. Welcome to the other main ingredient of hardtack, the weevils. The hardtack might have been free of pests when it was first loaded onto the ship, but months in a damp, dark cargo hold have turned the barrels into thriving insect condominiums. The most common residents were the biscuit weevil and the larder beetle. They would lay their eggs in the flour before it was even baked, and the larvae would then hatch and eat their way through the biscuit from the inside out. The hardtack you're holding is likely more tunnel than biscuit. This is where you encounter one of the most famous and stomach-turning bits of sailor lore. How did they deal with this unwanted protein? The most common method was simply to eat in the dark. What you couldn't see couldn't disgust you. Another popular technique, which you saw the old hands doing, was to tap the biscuit on the table before eating. This was known as the sailor's salutant, was meant to knock the adult weevils out. Of course, this did nothing about the larvae and eggs still inside. Some sailors, with a more philosophical bent, would refer to the weevils as extra meat and simply eat them. They were a source of protein. After all, the taste of the hardtack itself is bland and vaguely dusty, but the weevils add their own unique flavor, a slightly bitter, acrid note. It's a taste you will become intimately familiar with. You will learn to eat your biscuits quickly, without looking too closely at what you're putting in your mouth. Historians and archaeologists who have studied naval provisions have found that this weevil infestation was nearly universal. In fact, when they excavate shipwrecks from this era, the hardtack they find is often still riddled with the characteristic tunnels of its former inhabitants. It was such a common problem that naval victualling contracts sometimes specified a certain level of acceptable infestation. The question for historians isn't if a sailor's biscuits had weevils, but rather how many. The debate often revolves around the sailors' attitudes. Was the consumption of weevils a source of constant disgust and misery, a symbol of their wretched conditions, or did they genuinely become so accustomed to it that it was just a joke, a part of the daily routine that was accepted with gallows humor? The truth is likely a spectrum. For a new sailor like you, it's horrifying. For a veteran of 10 years at sea, it might be no more remarkable than the salt in the air. This normalization of the disgusting is a key survival mechanism. As you choke down your softened, weevil-laced biscuit, you realize the profound psychological effect of this food. It's not just nourishment, it's a constant reminder of your place in the world. This is not the food of kings or merchants. This is the food of the lowest rungs of society, a substance designed for subsistence, not pleasure. It's food that fights back. That has to be beaten into submission before it can be eaten. You look into your bowl of stew. It's a mix of salted beef, boiled into a stringy mush, and whatever edible odds and ends the cook could find. The salt beef or pork was the other pillar of the diet, stored in barrels of brine. Like the hardtack, it was durable but deeply unappetizing. It was often so saturated with salt that it had to be soaked in fresh water for hours before it could be cooked, a profligate use of a precious resource. Sometimes, the meat was so old it turned black and was hard as wood, earning it the nickname mahogany. This meal weevil why, biscuit and salty. Stringy stew is what you have to look forward to, day in and day out. There are no fresh vegetables, no fruit, no dairy, just the endless, monotonous cycle of salt and starch. This isn't just a bad meal, it's a nutritional disaster. A ticking time bomb that is slowly, silently, destroying the health of every man on this ship. You are filling your belly, but you are starving on a cellular level, and the consequences of that starvation are about to make themselves known in a truly horrific way. You've finished your meal of stew and hardtack, and now a powerful thirst has set in, a craving born of the intense saltness of the preserved meat. You make your way to the scuttlebutt on deck. This is the designated cask of fresh water for the crew, a large wooden barrel with a lid and a ladle, a communal drinking fountain for this floating village. The man on watch beside it, whose job is to prevent anyone from taking more than their allotted ration, gives you a nod. You lift the heavy wooden lid. The smell hits you first. It's a swampy, vegetal odor, the smell of stagnant water. You peer inside. The water is not clear. It's murky, with a greenish-brown tint, and you can see a slimy, gelatinous film of algae coating the inside of the barrel. A few dead insects float on the surface. This is your drinking water. Fresh water was the most critical and problematic resource on any long sea voyage. It was heavy, it took up valuable cargo space, and it went bad. The wooden casks it was stored in were not perfectly sterile. Bacteria and algae spores would inevitably get in. And in the warm, dark environment of the ship's hold, they would multiply over weeks and months. The clear, fresh water you started with would transform into this foul-smelling, slimy liquid. Sailors called it stinking water. You dipped the communal ladle in and pull out a cupful. You hold it up to the light. It's not just slimy, you can see tiny things moving in it. Minuscule worms and larvae. You have two choices: hold your nose and drink it, or go thirsty. Thirst is the more immediate torment. So you drink. The taste is as bad as the smell. It's slick and swampy, with a bitter aftertaste, but it is wet. It quenches the fire in your throat for a moment. This is why sailors of the 18th century drank alcohol. It wasn't just about recreation, it was a matter of public health and practicality. Beer, wine, and liquor are more stable than water. The alcohol acted as a natural preservative, killing off most of the microbes that made water go bad. A ship setting out on a long voyage would carry an enormous quantity of beer or wine. For English sailors, beer was the traditional drink. But beer also had a tendency to spoil in the tropical heat, turning sour and undrinkable. This led to the widespread adoption of spirits, particularly rum. Rum, a byproduct of the Caribbean sugar industry, was cheap, potent, and incredibly durable. It wouldn't spoil. The Royal Navy famously began issuing a daily rum ration, a practice that would continue for centuries. Pirates, being pirates, simply helped themselves to whatever they could plunder, and rum was a frequent and welcome prize. However, drinking straight rum all day was not conducive to running a ship. Drunken sailors fall from rigging and get into fights, so a solution was devised. You see it being prepared now by the quartermaster. He takes the daily rum ration and mixes it with water from the scuttlebutt. The mixture is typically 4 parts water to 1 part rum. He might also add a bit of sugar and lime juice, if any is available. This concoction is called grog. The invention of grog is credited to British Admiral Edward Vernon in 1740. He was nicknamed Old Grog because of a waterproof Geographic cloak he often wore, and the name stuck to his new drink. While pirates were likely mixing their rum and water long before it was official naval policy, the principle was the same. Diluting the rum made the supply last longer and kept the crew from getting too drunk too quickly. But it also had another, more important effect: the rum made the stinking water palatable. A splash of rum, sugar, and citrus could mask the foul taste and smell of the algae-infested water, making it much easier to drink. This is where a fascinating historical debate arises. For a long time, it was believed that the daily ration of grog, especially with its lime or lemon juice component, was what saved sailors from the ravages of scurvy. The story of James Linn's famous 1747 experiment, proving that citrus fruits cured scurvy, supported this. However, more recent historical analysis suggests the reality was more complicated. The amount of lime juice in the daily grog was often too small to be truly effective as a preventative. Furthermore, the Navy, in a bizarre cost-cutting and logistical move, often used limes from the West Indies instead of lemons from the Mediterranean. West Indian limes contain significantly less vitamin C than lemons. To make matters worse, they often process the juice by boiling it into a concentrate, a process which destroys most of the vitamin C. So for decades, sailors were drinking grog believing it was protecting them, when in fact the anti-score but IC element was nearly useless. On your pirate ship, the situation is even more haphazard. You get grog when rum is plentiful. You might get lime juice if you've recently plundered a ship carrying citrus. There is no system, no policy. It's a matter of luck. Today, the rum is flowing. The quartermaster ladles out the grog, and the mood on the ship lifts instantly. Men who were sullen and tired a moment ago are now laughing and talking. You take your cup of grog. It's still made with the same foul water, but the sharp, sweet tang of the rum and sugar overpowers the swampy taste. It's a small mercy, a moment of chemical bliss in a world of physical misery. You drink it down, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. For a little while, you can forget about the filth, the danger, and the bad food. You can forget that you are drinking a cocktail of algae, bacteria, and cheap liquor. This daily ritual highlights the razor's edge on which these men lived. Their water could sicken them. Their food was nutritionally void, but a simple mixture of rum and sugar could make it all bearable. It was a chemical crutch, a way to endure the unendurable. And as you watch your shipmates, their faces slack with the first flush of intoxication, you realize that the grog is as essential to the functioning of this ship as the wind in its sails. The sun has set, and you are below deck, trying to find some rest in your hammock. The single lantern casts its usual shifting shadows. The air is thick and hot, and the snores of your fellow pirates provide a discordant symphony. You are just beginning to drift off when you hear it. A faint scratching sound, coming from inside the wall, just inches from your head. Then a squeak, then the sound of dozens of tiny feet scurrying in the darkness. You knew they were here. Of course, you smelled their presence from day one, and you've seen them darting across the deck in the twilight hours. But it's here, in the dark and the quiet, that you truly understand the scale of the infestation. The ship does not just have rats, the ship belongs to the rats. You are merely a guest in their home. These are not the timid field mice of your former life. These are ship rats, most likely the Rattus rattus, or black rat. They are hardy, adaptable, and prolific breeders. A single pair of rats can produce hundreds of offspring in a year, and on a ship filled with food stores and endless hiding places, their population can explode. They are the ultimate stowaways, a shadow crew that outnumbers your own by at least 10 to 1. They are everywhere. They are in the bilge, the lowest part of the ship, feasting on the foul sludge that collects there. They are in the cargo hold, gnawing their way into barrels of hardtack and sacks of flour. They are in the walls, the ceiling, and under the floorboards. You hear them at all hours, a constant, rustling, chittering presence that becomes the background noise of your life. The damage they cause is immense. They contaminate far more food than they actually eat, soiling it with their droppings and urine. A whole barrel of grain could be condemned because of a rat infestation. They gnaw through anything and everything. They chew on the sails, weakening the canvas. They chew on the ropes, a constant source of terror for sailors who entrusted their lives to those lines while climbing the rigging. There are accounts of rats chewing through the leather parts of the ship's pumps, rendering them useless in an emergency. They have even been known to chew on the fingers and toes of sleeping sailors. Drawn by the salt and grease on their skin, you learn to sleep with your hands tucked under your blanket. And then there are the cockroaches. If the rats are the shadow crew, the cockroaches are their tiny, skittering minions. They thrive in the same damp, dark, and filthy conditions. You see them pouring out of crevices when a lantern is brought near. They crawl over the food preparation surfaces, the plates, and the men themselves. They are a constant, disgusting presence, a symbol of the ship's ingrained filth. This brings up a rather grim but practical question: how did pirates and sailors fight this relentless invasion? The most common method was to bring a predator on board. A good ship's cat was worth its weight in gold. Terriers were also popular, as they were natural-born rat killers. A dog or cat that was a proficient rat-ter was a cherished member of the crew. However, on a ship with hundreds, if not thousands, of rats, even the most heroic cat could only make a small dent in the population. Another method was simply to hunt them. Crews would organize rat hunts, using clubs and dogs to kill as many as they could. This was seen as both pest control and a form of sport, a way to break the monotony of a long voyage. But this leads to an even more desperate measure. What happened when the food ran out on a long, unsuccessful voyage? When the hardtack was gone and the salted meat barrels were empty, the crew would turn to the rats. This is a point that some romantic depictions of piracy conveniently ignore, but it was a grim reality, driven by starvation. Sailors would hunt and eat the very vermin they had been cursing for months. They would be trapped, fried, or boiled in stews. Some accounts describe rats as tasting like squirrel. A desperate attempt to normalize an act of pure survival. The historical debate around this topic is not whether it happened. The evidence is quite clear that it did, but how common it was. Was eating rats a frequent occurrence, a routine part of the lean times, or was it an act of last resort? A sign that a crew was on the absolute brink of starvation and death? The consensus among maritime historians leans towards the latter. It was a line that was only crossed when all other options were exhausted. To eat the ship's rats was to admit that your voyage had failed disastrously. Lying in your hammock, you feel a new kind of fear. It's not the fear of battle or of a storm. It's a slow, creeping dread. You are trapped on this floating piece of wood with an army of pests that are a constant drain on your resources and a threat to your health. The rats are not just a nuisance, they are a direct competitor for survival. They eat your food, they damage your ship, and they carry diseases like the plague. Although the direct link was not understood at the time, you pull your thin, greasy blanket up to your chin. The scratching sounds from the wall seem to get louder. You imagine the rats, fat and prosperous, feasting on your dwindling supplies while you and the crew slowly starve. You think of the cockroaches, scuttling over every surface, a tide of filth that can never be turned back. You finally understand that the battle for survival on this ship is not just fought against the sea or against other ships. It's fought every single day, in every dark corner, against these uninvited passengers. They are a constant, living reminder of the decay and the squalor that define your existence. And as you finally drift into a fitful, troubled sleep, your dreams are filled with the rustling of a million tiny feet. It starts as a minor annoyance, a persistent itch on your scalp. You scratch it, thinking nothing of it, but then the itch returns, more insistent this time. Soon, you are scratching all the time, a frantic, mindless habit. You feel it on your chest, under your arms, along the waistband of your breeches. It's a crawling, tickling sensation, a fire just under the surface of your skin. You are not alone in your misery. All around you, you see men engaged in the same dance of discomfort, scratching their arms, their necks, their ribs with a grim, focused intensity. You have become a host. Your body is now a walking ecosystem for a variety of tiny, parasitic passengers. The most common and intimate of these are the body lice, Pediculus humanus. They live in the seams of your filthy clothes, crawling onto your skin to feed on your blood, then retreating back to the fabric to lay their eggs. They thrive in the exact conditions you are living in infrequent washing of both body and clothes. You have provided them with the perfect home. You ask one of the older sailors, a man named Jones, what can be done. He laughs, a dry, humorless sound, and shows you his own skin, a patchwork of raid, bites, and old scars. Welcome to the sailor's plague. Lad, he says, you can kill 1,000, and 1,000,000 more will come to the funeral. Despite his cynicism, he shows you the common methods of delicizing. The most popular is SMO using, which you've heard about but now witness firsthand. A man takes off his shirt, a rare act of undress, and holds it over the smoke of a small, contained fire or a lantern. The smoke and heat force the lice out of the seams. He and his friends then huddle over the garment, picking off the stunned insects and crushing them between their thumbnails. It's a slow, tedious process, and it provides only temporary relief. Within days, the eggs left behind will hatch, and the infestation will be as bad as ever. Another, more social method is simply grooming. You see men sitting on deck in pairs, one picking the lice from the other's hair and clothes. Like primates, it's a strangely intimate act in this world of rough masculinity, a moment of cooperation born of shared misery. But the lice are just the beginning. Your hammock, that greasy piece of canvas you call a bed, is home to a thriving population of bedbugs. They hide in the crevices of the wood and the fabric during the day and come out at night to feed, leaving you with itchy welts that you discover in the morning. And then there are the fleas, carried by the rats and the ship's dogs, which bite your ankles and legs, adding to the symphony of itching. This constant parasitic assault has consequences beyond simple discomfort. The incessant scratching breaks the skin, creating thousands of tiny open wounds on your filthy skin with your dirty fingernails. These small cuts can easily become infected. A simple spike infester, turning into a painful, pus-filled boil. You see men all around you with these sores, some of which grow to alarming sizes, becoming hard, red, and hot to the touch. This is where your lack of hygiene truly begins to reveal its deadly potential. In the absence of any concept of antisepsis, these skin infections can spiral out of control. A minor boil can lead to cellulitis, a deeper infection of the skin, or even sepsis, a life-threatening infection of the blood. You are living in a world where a bug bite is not just an irritation, it's a potential death sentence. The medical knowledge of the time was completely unequipped to deal with this. The ship's surgeon, who is likely the cook or the carpenter, might try to treat a bad boil by lancing it with an unsterilized knife, a procedure that is as likely to introduce new, more dangerous bacteria as it is to help. Other folk remedies were popular, such as applying a poultice of tar or even chewed tobacco to the sore, in the hope that it would draw out the poison. Historians studying the daily lives of sailors often point to this constant battle with vermin as a major factor in the crew's overall health and morale. It was a relentless, grinding war of attrition that could never be won. The psychological toll of being constantly itchy, of never feeling clean, of knowing your body is being fed upon, is immense. It contributes to the general irritability and stress of life at sea. Is it any wonder that tempers were short and violence could erupt over the smallest slight, when every man was living in a state of perpetual physical discomfort? Some historical accounts suggest that pirate crews, being outside the rigid structure of the Navy, might have occasionally taken more drastic measures. A captain with a particularly infested ship might order a field day, where the entire crew would go ashore on a deserted island, build huge bonfires, and boil all their clothes and bedding in large pots. This was the only truly effective way to kill both the lice and their eggs. However, this required time, security from attack, and a suitable location, luxuries that a pirate crew on the run could not often afford. You lie in your hammock at night, trying not to scratch. The itching is a constant reminder of your own filth. You feel crawling sensations on your skin, even when nothing is there. It's a psychological torment as much as a physical one. You think of clean sheets, of a hot bath, of clothes that don't have a life of their own. These simple things now seem like the stuff of fantasy, like treasures more valuable than gold or silver. You have become a microcosm of the ship itself, a living, breathing vessel that is infested, decaying, and slowly being consumed from the inside out. The line between you and your squalid environment has blurred. The filth of the ship has become the filth of your own body, and this intimate, crawling horror is a daily reality from which there is no escape. It's been months since you've seen land, months since you've tasted anything fresh. Your diet has been an unvarying rotation of salty, stringy meat and weevil-infested hardtack. You've grown accustomed to it, but your body has not. A profound and insidious change is beginning to take place, not just within you, but throughout the entire crew. It starts subtly. You notice a deep, unshakable lethargy setting in. Every task, even coiling a rope, feels like a monumental effort. Your muscles ache. A dull, Deep pain that sleep doesn't seem to cure. You feel irritable and melancholic, a black mood settling over the ship that has nothing to do with the weather. You chalk it up to the monotony, the bad food, the endless sea. But it's something more specific, more sinister. The first truly alarming sign appears in your mouth. You're gnawing on a piece of heart, softened and grog as usual, when you feel a strange looseness in your teeth. You probe one with your tongue. It wiggles. A cold knot of fear tightens in your stomach. Later, while cleaning your teeth with a frayed twig, a crude but common form of dental hygiene, you notice your gums are tender and swollen. They bleed at the slightest touch. When you look at them in a rare shard of polished metal you use as a mirror, you see they are turning a dark, purplish red and look puffy, almost like a sponge. You are not alone. You hear men complaining of the same things. You see them spitting blood over the side of the ship. One of the older sailors, a man named Davies, smiles grimly at you, a smile that reveals gaps where his teeth used to be. The sea devil's got its hooks in you. Lad, he rasps, this is just the beginning. He is talking about scurvy. This is the great plague of the age of sail, a disease more feared by sailors than storms or enemy cannons. For centuries, it was a profound medical mystery. It would appear on long voyages, after months at sea, and its progression was terrifying and relentless. We know now that scurvy is simply the result of a severe deficiency in vitamin C, ascorbic acid. The human body cannot produce its own vitamin C, so it must be obtained from our diet, primarily from fresh fruits and vegetables. Vitamin C is essential for the synthesis of collagen, a protein that is the primary building block of all our connective tissues: our skin, our blood vessels, our cartilage, our bones. When you are deprived of vitamin C, your body can no longer produce new collagen. It's like a bricklayer running out of mortar. The structures of your body begin, quite literally, to fall apart. The spongy, bleeding gums and loose teeth are the classic early symptoms. The collagen that holds your teeth in their sockets is deteriorating. As the disease progresses, its effects become more widespread and bizarre. You notice dark, blotchy bruises appearing on your legs and arms, even without any injury. These are caused by spontaneous bleeding under the skin, as the walls of your capillaries, no longer reinforced by collagen, become fragile and burst. Your joints begin to swell and ache with excruciating pain. Your muscles, deprived of their connective tissue, begin to waste away. You become incredibly weak, so much so that climbing a ladder to the rigging becomes an impossible task. The slightest knock or bump results in a gaping wound that refuses to heal. The skin becomes dry, scaly, and rough. This is where the historical understanding of the disease gets particularly murky. Before the 18th century, the cause was a complete mystery. Theories abounded. Was it the foul sea air, the salty food, the damp conditions, laziness? Some even believed it was contagious. Medical texts from the period offer a bewildering array of useless cures, from drinking diluted sulfuric acid elixir of vitriol to bloodletting, to burying the afflicted man up to his neck in worms, and if you could find a beach. Historians who study the history of medicine often point to scurvy as a prime example of how preconceived notions can blind science. For centuries, the clues were there. Ships that happened to stock onions, or crews that traded for fruit, or explorers who learned to drink spruce beer from indigenous peoples, often had lower rates of scurvy. But the connection was rarely made in a systematic way. The cure was so simple a piece of fruit that it seemed too mundane to be true. The medical establishment was looking for a complex cure for a complex-seeming disease. The debate about who discovered the cure is also fascinating. While James Linn's 1747 experiment is famous, he gave different groups of sailors cider, sulfuric acid, vinegar, seawater, and, crucially, oranges and lemons, with only the last group recovering. His findings were not widely adopted by the British Navy for almost 50 years. Bureaucracy, cost, and stubbornness stood in the way. On your pirate ship, there is no land, no enlightened medical officer. There is only folk wisdom and superstition. Some of the older sailors might advise you to drink your own urine or to chew on a piece of lead. The suffering is immense, and the remedies are useless. You look around at your crewmates. The transformation is horrifying. Men who were strong and capable a few months ago are now weak, hobbling invalids. Their breath is unbelievably foul, a smell of decay that comes from their rotting gums. Their skin is sallow. Their eyes are sunken. The ship is turning into a floating hospital. A charnel house in slow motion. And the worst is yet to come. This is just the beginning of scurvy's horrors. The sea devil has you, and it's not letting go. Your world has shrunk. It's now defined by the throbbing ache in your joints and the metallic taste of blood in your mouth. Your duties on deck have been reduced to the simplest tasks you can manage without collapsing. During one of these slow, painful work periods, you find yourself near the galley, the ship's kitchen. It's not a room, but more of a small, designated area on the deck, often sheltered by a canvas awning. Presiding over it is Silas, the one-legged cook and carpenter, a man whose dual professions inspire very little confidence in either his cooking or his craftsmanship. You peer into his domain, and what you see does nothing to lift your spirits. The galley is, without a doubt, the filthiest place on this entire filthy ship, which is a remarkable achievement. The centerpiece is a brick firebox, a simple hearth where Silas does his cooking in a large, soot-blackened cauldron that looks like it has never been properly scrubbed. The deck around the firebox is slick with a permanent layer of grease, spilled stew, and fish guts. The smell is a potent combination of rancid fat, old smoke, and whatever is currently bubbling in the pot. Silas is preparing the day's meal. HES hacking at a slab of salt beef with a cleaver on a wooden cutting board that is stained black with old blood and dirt. The board is warped and splintered, and you can see bits of old food packed into the cracks. He handles the meat with his bare hands, which are covered in the same grime as everyone else's, with the added patina of tar from his carpentry work. He doesn't wash the meat, he just chops it into chunks and tosses it into the cauldron of boiling water. He reaches for a handful of crushed hardtack to thicken the stew, his hand disappearing into a sack that you know is swarming with weevils. He doesn't seem to notice or care. To him, it's all just part of the recipe. The water for the stew comes from a cask right next to the galley, and you see him dip a bucket in without even looking. It's the same slimy, greenish water that you are forced to drink. He believes, as many did at the time, that boiling the water purifies it, which is true to an extent, but it doesn't remove the filth that goes in with it. You see his kitchen tools scattered around, a few greasy knives, a long wooden spoon worn smooth with use, and a couple of battered wooden bowls. There is no concept of cross-contamination. He uses the same knife to cut raw, salted meat as he does to portion out the cook's stew. The same cutting board that held the beef might be used to gut a fish a few minutes later, without being washed in between. This is a prime example of the 18th century understanding of food safety, which is to say, there wasn't one. The link between dirty kitchens and foodborne illness was not understood at all. Illnesses like Salmonella or E. coli, which we now associate with poor food handling, were simply lumped in with all the other fevers and fluxes that plague sailors. A man who got sick after a meal wouldn't blame the cook's dirty hands, he'd blame the bad humors in his own body. This leads to a curious and slightly disgusting historical tidbit: the role of the ship's cook. On a naval vessel, the cook was an official position, though often a low-ranking one. On a pirate ship, the cook was a crucial member of the crew, but not always for his culinary skills. The articles of many pirate ships, like those of Black Bart Roberts, specified that the cook would have his own share of the plunder. But the job was often given to a man who was no longer fit for heavy combat or strenuous sailing duties, such as an older sailor, or, in Silas's case, a man who had lost a limb. His primary job was not to create delicious meals, but to ration the provisions carefully and make the monotonous food just edible enough to be choked down. Historians who study the logistics of piracy often debate the cook's true power. Was he just a low-level functionary? Or did his control over the food supply give him a subtle form of influence? Say a good cook who could make the wretched ingredients taste slightly better would be a popular man. A bad or lazy cook could make life even more miserable for the crew. Given the democratic nature of a pirate ship, a truly terrible cook could, in theory, be voted out of his job. Looking at Silas's greasy, chaotic galley, you wonder how he manages to keep his position. Perhaps the standard is just that low. You watch as Silas, tasting the stew, spits directly back into the pot. It's not an act of malice, just unthinking habit. The cauldron bubbles away. A primordial soup of salt meat, weevils, lousy water, and the cook's own saliva. This is the meal that is supposed to sustain you, to give you the strength to fight the scurvy that is currently dismantling your body. Instead, it looks like a delivery system for a host of other diseases. The galley is a perfect metaphor for the entire pirate enterprise. It's a system that runs on improvisation, desperation, and a profound ignorance of the invisible dangers that surround it. They had the tools for survival: the cauldron, the fire, the food, but they lack the knowledge to use them safely. They are fighting a war against starvation while simultaneously poisoning themselves with their own filth. Silas catches you looking. He grins, a gap-toothed, greasy smile. Smells good. Elad, he says, gesturing to his bubbling cauldron with his filthy spoon. You just nod, a wave of nausea washing over you. You've lost your appetite. The scurvy is tightening its grip. The weakness in your limbs has become profound. Your gums are now so swollen and rotten that chewing is an agony. And you subsist on a liquid diet of grog and whatever broth you can stomach from Silas's cauldron. But the disease has saved its most grotesque and psychologically disturbing symptom for this stage. You have an old scar on your forearm, a jagged white line from a childhood accident with a hayseed. For years, it has been a part of you, a pale, dormant memory etched into your skin. One morning, you notice something strange. The scar is no longer white. It's turning a dark, angry red. It feels tender to the touch, and the skin around it is puffy and inflamed. Over the next few days, you watch in horror as the scar, a wound that healed more than a decade ago, seems to be unhealing itself. The edges soften, the skin separates, and soon it isn't open. Weeping so once more. You look around the ship and see the same horror reflected in the eyes of the other men. A sailor who lost a finger years ago finds the stump swelling and turning purple. A man with a brand on his shoulder from his time as a runaway servant sees the letters raise up, round red, as if the branding iron had just been lifted. Every old injury, every healed wound, every forgotten trauma on the bodies of the crew is re-emerging, breaking through the surface of the present. This is one of the most terrifying and least understood manifestations of advanced scurvy, because your body can no longer produce collagen, the mortar that holds your tissues together. It can no longer maintain old repairs, the scar tissue that closed your wounds, which requires constant maintenance at a cellular level, is disintegrating. Your body is literally deconstructing itself, starting with its weakest points. It's as if your own history is rising up to attack you. The psychological impact of this is devastating. It's one thing to suffer from a new illness. It's another entirely to see the healed parts of your past come undone. It feels supernatural, like a curse. Sailors, already a superstitious lot, would have seen this as a sign of profound damnation. They were not just physically sick, they were being unmade, their bodies regressing towards a state of total dissolution. This symptom, more than any other, highlights the fundamental role of collagen in the body. It's not just for building new things, it's for maintaining everything. It's the constant, invisible repair crew that keeps you from falling apart. scurvy fires that grew. This phenomenon of old wounds reopening has been documented for centuries, and it was a source of great puzzlement for early physicians. In his A Treatise of the Scurvy 1753, James Lynn described it in detail, noting with astonishment how scars of wounds which had been for many years healed were forced open again by this virulent distemper. Even with our modern scientific understanding, the sight of it would be profoundly shocking. For you, in this pre-scientific age, it's a form of body horror that defies all reason. Historians who delve into the personal accounts of sailors from this era often find this specific symptom mentioned with a unique kind of dread. It was a visible, undeniable sign that the disease had reached a critical stage. While bleeding gums were a misery and lethargy was a burden, the reopening of old scars was a clear message from your own body the end is near. The debate among medical historians on this point is a subtle one. Did the reopening of wounds actually hasten death, or was it simply a marker of how advanced the disease already was? The consensus is that it was more of a symptom than a cause of further decline, but a psychologically crushing one. It undermined a sailor's sense of physical integrity, his belief in his own body's ability to heal and endure. It made him feel fragile, broken, and doomed. You see a man sitting on a crate, staring at a puckered scar on his leg that is now a raw, open ulcer. He is not crying. He is preternaturally calm, his face a mask of resigned despair. He has accepted his fate. The ship is now full of such men, ghosts waiting to happen. The few who are still relatively healthy, perhaps because they had a stronger constitution, or maybe they just managed to sneak an extra share of the cook's rations, can barely manage the essential tasks of sailing the ship. You lie in your hammock, the air thick with the smell of sickness and decay. You can feel the dull throb of your old scar, a beacon of pain on your arm. It connects you to all the other suffering men on this vessel, each one a living museum of his own past injuries, now on public display. The disease is not just in your gums or your joints, it's in your memory, in your very identity as a person who has lived and healed. Scurvy is erasing your past, and in doing so, it is erasing your future. The ship sails on, a floating mausoleum, while the bodies of its crew slowly, inexorably, come apart at the seams. As if the slow, creeping horror of scurvy wasn't enough, a new terror now strikes the ship, and it is anything but slow. It begins with a sudden, violent cramping in your gut. You barely have time to stumble out of your hammock and lurch towards the deck before your body betrays you completely. You collapse near the ship's rail, overcome by a wave of explosive, watery diarrhea. This isn't a simple stomach bug. It's violent, it's uncontrollable, and as you look down in horror, you see it is mixed with blood. You have the bloody flux. This is the sailor's term for dysentery, a severe intestinal inflammation that was rampant on ships of the era. While scurvy was the slow killer, dysentery was the fast one. It could sweep through a crowded, filthy ship like wildfire, incapacitating a crew in a matter of days. If the naval cannons were the pirates' most feared external enemy, the bloody flux was their most feared internal one. The cause is simple. You have ingested fecal matter. It could have been from the contaminated water in the scuttlebutt, which was likely full of bacteria like Shigella or a nasty amoeba like Entamoeba histolithical. It could have been from Silas the cook's unwashed hands as he prepared your food. It could have been from your own hands after a visit to the ship's head before you ate your biscuit. In this environment of concentrated filth, the pathways for infection are endless. You are living in a closed system where waste and food are in constant, intimate contact. The experience is a waking nightmare. The cramps are agonizing, doubling you over with pain. The urge to relieve yourself is constant and urgent, forcing you to make repeated, humiliating trips to the head. But you are so weak from the scurvy and now the dysentery, that even this short journey is a Herculean effort. Many men don't make it. The 'tween deck, already a pit of squalor, becomes a cesspool. The stench, which you thought could not possibly get worse, reaches a new, unbearable level. The dehydration is severe and rapid. Your body is purging all its fluids, but you can barely keep any water down. Your thirst is a raging fire, but every sip of the foul water seems to make the cramping worse. Your mouth is dry, your eyes are sunken, your skin loses all its elasticity. You are withering away. Looking around the ship, you see you are one of many victims. The bloody flux is tearing through the crew. Men lie moaning in their hammocks, too weak to move, covered in their own filth. The few remaining able-bodied sailors are exhausted, torn between their duties to sail the ship and their attempts to care for the sick. But what care can they offer? The medical understanding of dysentery at the time was, once again, fatally flawed. It was often attributed to bad air or the consumption of unripe fruit, a tragic irony given that fruit would have been the one thing that could have saved them from scurvy. The treatments were ineffective and often dangerous. The ship's surgeon might advocate for bloodletting, believing it would release the bad humors causing the flux. This would only further weaken and dehydrate the patient. Another common treatment was to administer powerful purgatives, like mercury-based calomel, on the theory that you needed to violently expel the sickness from the body. This, of course, only made the diarrhea and dehydration worse. This is a point of debate among medical historians, were the doctors of the 18th century actively harming their patients from a modern perspective. Their treatments seem barbaric and counterintuitive. However, it's argued that they were acting logically within their own flawed understanding of the human body. The theory of humoral is the belief that health depended on a balance of four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile dominated medical thinking. If an illness was caused by an excess of a bad humor, then purging it from the body through bleeding or laxatives made perfect sense. They were not malicious, they were tragically wrong. On your ship, the remedies are even more desperate. An older sailor might advise you to drink water that has had a red-hot piece of iron plunged into it, believing the heat would purify it. Another might offer a concoction of burnt cork mixed with grog, a primitive attempt to create a binding agent. You are so desperate, you might try anything. The death toll begins to rise. A man who was complaining of cramps in the morning is dead by evening. The traditional burial at sea is performed with grim frequency. The deceased is sewn into his own hammock with a couple of cannonballs at his feet to weigh him down. A brief, clumsy prayer is said, and the body is tipped over the side. The splash is a small, final sound, quickly lost in the vastness of the ocean. You lie in your hammock, shivering with fever despite the stifling heat of the lower deck. You are fading. The line between scurvy and dysentery has blurred. One disease is dismantling your body's structure, while the other is draining it of life. You have seen more men die from these invisible enemies in the past week than you would see in a dozen sea battles. The glorious, free life of a pirate has been reduced to this alone, agonizing death in a sweltering, stinking hammock, your body consumed by filth from the inside out. In the midst of this crucible of disease, an accident happens. During a sudden squall, a loose block from the rigging, a heavy wooden pulley swings down and smashes a sailor's arm against the mast. The crack of the bone is audible even over the wind. The man screams, a sound of pure, white-hot agony. He collapses to the deck, clutching his shattered limb. In this moment, the slow, internal killers of scurvy and dysentery are forgotten, replaced by the immediate, brutal reality of traumatic injury. Now, all eyes turn to the man who must deal with its eyeless, the one-legged cook and carpenter. He is, by default, the ship's surgeon. This was an incredibly common arrangement on pirate and even many merchant vessels. A dedicated, trained surgeon was a luxury. The man with the best set of sharp tools was the carpenter. He had saws, chisels, and knives. He understood how to work with wood, and the grim logic of the time figured that working with bone was similar enough. He knew about structure and stress. Alternatively, the cook might be chosen, as he was skilled with knives and had a strong stomach for butchery. Silas, being both, is the undisputed and terrifying choice. He hobbles over, wiping his greasy hands on his breeches. He carries no medical bag. His instruments are his woodworking tools. There is no white coat, no sterile field, no gentle bedside manner. He is a pragmatist, about to perform a task of human carpentry. The injured sailor is half mad with pain, his arm clearly broken in multiple places, the bone jutting out at an unnatural angle. Silas examines it with a critical eye, not like a healer, but like a craftsman inspecting a damaged piece of wood. He shakes his head. It's splintered to ruin. He declares to the small crowd that has gathered, "Got to come off." There is no second opinion. There is no alternative. A complex fracture like this, in a world without sterile surgery or antibiotics, is a guaranteed death sentence from gangrene. Amputation is the only chance, however slim, that the man has of surviving. The very concept of a surgeon in the 18th century was vastly different from what we know today. Surgeons were not considered physicians. They were tradesmen, on par with barbers who also performed minor surgery. Hence the red and white striped barber pole representing blood and bandages and butchers. They dealt with the external, physical body, lancing boils, setting bones, and, most dramatically, amputating limbs. They learned their trade through apprenticeship, not medical school. Their knowledge of anatomy was often rudimentary, and their understanding of infection was non-existent. This is where you encounter one of the most significant and debated aspects of pirate surgery. Some popular accounts and novels portray pirate surgeons as surprisingly skilled, almost mythical figures who could patch up any wound. The reality, according to most historians, was far grimmer. While a few famous pirate ships might have been lucky enough to capture a real surgeon and force him into service, the vast majority of crews had to rely on a man like Silas. His skill was not in healing, but in speed. A successful amputation was one that was done quickly, to minimize the time the patient spent in excruciating pain and to reduce blood loss. The preparations for the surgery are swift and brutal. The injured man is given a large swig of rum, the only anesthetic available. It will not numb the pain, it will only, perhaps, numb his awareness of it. Several strong crewmen are called over. Their job is not to assist, but to hold the patient down. They are human restraints. Silas lays out his tools on a piece of dirty canvas. There is a small, sharp knife, a large, coarse-toothed tenon saw from his carpentry kit, and a hook. He does not wash them. He does not wash his hands. The idea that invisible germs on his tools or hands could kill his patient is a concept that won't exist for another 150 years. He believes, as was common, that pus formation in a wound, laudable pus, was a natural and even desirable part of the healing process, not a sign of infection. You watch, your stomach churning, a cold sweat on your brow. This is a raw, more immediate form of horror than the slow decay of disease. This is deliberate, methodical violence, performed in the name of healing. The cook, the man who prepares your food, is about to dismember one of your shipmates with the same tools he uses to build a storage crate. The line between sustenance, construction, and destruction has completely blurred. Silas is the master of the ship's tangible world, shaping its wood, its food, and now, its bodies. The screaming is about to begin. Before the grim theater of the amputation can begin, another, smaller drama unfolds. A young sailor, a boy named Finn who was helping secure the flapping sail during the squall, stumbles over to Silas. He holds out his hand. "Got a splinter. Cook," he says, his voice trying to be brave. "The bad one." You look at his hand. A wicked-looking shard of wood, several inches long, has driven itself deep into the fleshy part of his palm. It happened when he gripped a fraying rope. It's a common injury on a wooden ship, a daily nuisance. In your old life on land, it would be a painful but trivial event. You'd pull it out, maybe wash the wound, and forget about it in a day or two. Here, on this ship, in this world of filth, a splinter is not a nuisance. It's a loaded gun. Silas, annoyed at being distracted from the main event, glances at the boy's hand. He grabs a pair of pliers from his toolkit, pliers that were probably used to pull nails just an hour ago, and grips the end of the splinter. Without a word of warning, he yanks. Finn cries out. A sharp intake of breath, and the splinter comes free, followed by a gush of dark blood. There, Silas grunts, tossing the bloody piece of wood onto the deck. Get back to work. He turns his attention back to the man with the shattered arm. Finn, Palant clutching his bleeding hand, stumbles away. No one cleans the wound. No one bandages it. He might wrap it in a piece of his own dirty shirt, but that's it. The open wound, now contaminated with whatever was on the splinter and Silas's pliers, is left to fend for itself. You have just witnessed the beginning of a likely death sentence. In the 18th century, before the germ theory of disease, the greatest killer in any kind of surgery or wound treatment was not the injury itself, but the subsequent infection. Tetanus, gangrene, sepsis, these were the specters that haunted every cut, scrape, and puncture. A tiny, insignificant wound could, and often did, lead to a slow, agonizing death. The very environment of the ship is a soup of deadly microbes. The wood of the deck is saturated with animal and human waste. The ropes are caked in grime. The soil and rust that coat every surface are teeming with bacteria like Clostridium tetani, the cause of tetanus, which would have been gruesomely familiar to the crew as Lockahud. An infection would begin with a fever and some localized swelling. Then, the wound would start to smell foul, and a thin, nasty-looking pus would weep from it. The red lines of limb fang, might start to creep up the limb, a visible sign that the infection was spreading through the lymphatic system. Soon, the raging fever, delirium, and eventually, septic shock. This is a key point that historians of medicine emphasize for people in the pre-antibiotic era. There was no such thing as a minor injury. Every break in the skin was a potential doorway for death. This created a vastly different psychological relationship with one's own body and the physical world. A sense of profound vulnerability was a constant companion. The debate among historians often revolves around the pirates' own perception of this danger. Did they understand that filth was related to wound infection? Even if they didn't know the mechanism, there is some evidence to suggest a rudimentary, practical understanding. Some accounts mention washing wounds with alcohol, rum, or even urine, which is sterile when it leaves the body, though this was likely accidental. The most common method of cauterization, which we will see later, was as much about sealing the wound from the bad air as it was about stopping the bleeding. So, they may have known that a clean wound healed better than a dirty one, but their definition of clean was tragically inadequate. They were fighting an enemy they could neither see or understand. You watch Finn wrap his hand in a grimy rag. He feels a sense of relief now that the splinter is out. He has no idea that his real battle has just begun. The agents of his potential demise have been successfully introduced into his bloodstream. His fate now depends entirely on the strength of his own immune system, an immune system that has already been battered and weakened by months of malnutrition and scurvy. He is in a poor position to fight a two-front war. This small, almost unnoticed event is, in many ways, more terrifying than the spectacular violence of a cannonade or a sword fight. The cannonball is an honest enemy. It kills you loudly and quickly. The splinter is a treacherous one. It smiles and promises a minor inconvenience while quietly planting the seeds of your destruction. The freedom that pirates sought was a freedom from kings and captains, a freedom from economic oppression. But they could never be free from the tyranny of the microbial world. They could overthrow a captain, but they could not overthrow the invisible empire of bacteria. Their rebellion, for all its bravado and violence, was ultimately powerless against the silent, patient lethality of a single, sturdy splinter of wood. The moment has arrived. The sailor with the shattered arm, his name is O'Malley, is now propped up against the mainmast. He is white as a sheet, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and intoxication from the rum he has been forced to drink. 4 of the strongest men on the crew, their faces grim, have taken their positions to hold his shoulders and torso pinned against the mast. Another holds his good arm, and the 4th is responsible for securing the leg on the same side. They are human clamps, and their only job is to prevent him from moving for the next 2 minutes. 2 minutes that will feel like a lifetime. Silas, the cook carpenter's surgeon, hobbles into place. He has his tools ready. The scene is lit by the harsh, gray light of the overcast sky. There is no music, no ceremony, just the sound of the wind, the creak of the ship, and O'Malley's ragged, terrified breathing. This is the amputation serenade, a symphony of horror. Silas's first move is with the knife. With a single, surprisingly swift motion, he makes a deep, circular cut through the skin and muscle of O'Malley's upper arm, a few inches above the mangled fracture. The cut is deliberately made high up, in a section of flesh that appears healthy, in the hopes of getting ahead of any potential spread of decay from the damaged area. O'Malley's body arches, and a terrible, strangled scream is ripped from his throat, a sound that is barely human. The men holding him strain, their knuckles white, as his body convulses in agony. Blood wells up from the incision, a shocking, vibrant reed against his pale skin, and begins to pour onto the deck. There is no time to waste. Blood loss is as great an enemy as the pain. Before the scream has even faded, Silas is reaching for his second instrument, the saw. It's a simple 10-inch saw, designed for making straight cuts in wood. Its teeth are coarse, meant for ripping through fibers, not for precision. He places the saw's blade into the bloody track of the knife, right against the exposed humerus bone. Then he begins to saw. The sound is the most horrific part. It's a wet, grating, crunching sound. It's the sound of metal teeth tearing through living bone. It is profoundly, obscenely wrong. O'Malley is no longer screaming words. He is producing a continuous, high-pitched shriek of pure, undiluted agony that seems to go on and on. His eyes have rolled back in his head. The men holding him are gritting their teeth, their faces averted, their own bodies slick with sweat. You feel a wave of nausea and dizziness, and you have to grip the rail to keep from fainting. Speed is everything. A skilled surgeon of the era could amputate all him in under a minute. Silas, for all his crudeness, is not slow. He works with a grim, focused efficiency, his movements powerful and direct. Saw, saw, saw. The grating noise continues, a brutal rhythm punctuated by the shrieks of the patient. Finally, with a last, sickening crunch, the saw breaks through the last bit of bone. The lower part of the arm, a deadened useless thing, falls to the deck with a wet thud. The screaming stops abruptly as O'Malley mercifully faints from the shock and pain. For a moment, there is a stunned silence, broken only by the wind. But the procedure is not over. The severed stump is now a fountain of blood, pumping from the brachial artery. If this isn't stopped immediately, O'Malley will bleed to death in minutes. Silas drops the saw and grabs his third tool, a metal hook. He uses it to poke and probe inside the gory mess of the stump, searching for the end of the artery. Once he finds it, he pulls it out from the surrounding tissue, and another crewman, his assistant for this part, quickly ties it off with a piece of thread. This ligation of the major arteries was a key innovation in amputation, a significant improvement over earlier, more brutal methods. This is a point of some historical debate. While ligation was known, was it commonly and effectively practiced by a rough-and-ready surgeon like a pirate carpenter? Some historians argue that it required more anatomical knowledge than a typical tradesman would possess. They suggest that a more common, and far more brutal, method was used to control the bleeding cauterization. We will see that horror shortly. The fact that Silas is attempting to ligate the artery suggests he has at least some second-hand knowledge of proper surgical procedure, perhaps learned from watching a real surgeon or from naval service. The major vessels are tied off, but the stump is still weeping blood from countless smaller capillaries. The final stage of the operation must now begin. The open face of the wound, a cross-section of skin, muscle, and bone, is a gaping invitation to every germ on the ship. It must be closed, and the method for that is as brutal as everything that has come before it. You look at O'Malley, slumped unconscious against the mast. You look at the severed arm lying on the deck. You look at Silas, his own hands and arms now slick with blood. The serenade is over, but the slow, silent coda of infection, fever, and potential death is just beginning. O'Malley is unconscious, a small mercy in this sea of brutality. His breathing is shallow, his face a deathly pallor. The amputation is complete, but the most critical phase for his immediate survival has just begun, stopping the bleeding, unclosing the wound. Silas has tied off the main artery, a small island of relative sophistication in this ocean of butchery. But the entire surface of the stump, the muscle, the tissue, the very marrow of the bone is still oozing blood. This is where the hot work begins. Another crewman brings forward a small brazier of glowing coals. Resting in the coals is a flat iron tool, perhaps a small spade or even the flat of a cleaver, heated until it glows a dull, angry red. This is the cautery iron. The smell of hot metal fills the air. Silas takes the heated iron. There is no hesitation. He presses the glowing, sizzling metal directly onto the raw, open face of the stump. The sound is sickening, a loud hiss and crackle as the intense heat sears the living tissue. A plume of foul-smelling smoke erupts, the smell of burnt flesh and boiling blood. It's a smell that will be permanently burned into your memory. Even though O'Malley is unconscious, his body reacts violently to the massive trauma. His limbs jerk, and a low moan escapes his lips. The men holding him flinch but do not let go. Silas works quickly, methodically pressing the hot iron against every part of the wound surface. The purpose of this horrific act is twofold. First, and most importantly, it's for hemostasis. The intense heat sears the smaller blood vessels shut, stopping the bleeding through brute force. It's a crude but effective way to prevent the patient from bleeding to death. Second, it was believed that the searing cleansed the wound, sealing it off from the bad air that was thought to cause putrefaction. In a way, they were not entirely wrong. The heat would have killed surface bacteria, a form of primitive, accidental sterilization. The problem is that it also created a massive burn wound, a thick layer of dead, necrotic tissue called desher, which is actually a perfect breeding ground for anaerobic bacteria like tetanus and gangrene to thrive underneath. This is the brutal paradox of pre-modern surgery. The very act intended to save the patient often created the conditions for a later, more agonizing death from infection. But Silas isn't done. He has another therapy in his arsenal. He calls for the gunpowder. A crewman brings over a powder horn. Silas takes a handful of the fine black powder and mixes it with a little rum or seawater to form a thick, gritty paste. He then smears this paste all over the seared, blackened stump. This practice was known as powder cautery. The belief was that the components of gunpowder, sulfur and saltpeter potassium nitrate, had antiseptic properties. This sulfur, in particular, was a long-standing folk remedy for skin ailments and was thought to ward off infection. After applying the gunpowder paste, the final step is to bandage the wound. There are no sterile gauze pads. The bandage is a piece of old sailcloth, likely stiff with tar and dirt, which is wrapped tightly around the stump. The job is done. O'Malley, still mercifully unconscious, is carried below deck and placed in his hammock, where he will either wake up to a world of unimaginable pain or not wake up at all. His fate is now a coin toss between infection, shock, and blood loss. The historical use of cauterization versus ligation tying off arteries, is a subject of much debate among historians of surgery. Ligation, rediscovered and promoted by the French surgeon Ambroise in the 16th century, was considered a more humane and effective method. However, it required more skill and anatomical knowledge. Cauterization was brutal, destructive, but also fast and straightforward. On a rolling ship, in the hands of an untrained carpenter, the simpler method of burning the flesh was often the default. The use of gunpowder is another fascinating footnote. While it sounds barbaric, the saltpeter may have had some mild antibacterial effect. It was a case of using the materials at hand, guided by a mixture of folk wisdom, desperation, and flawed medical theory. As the crew disperses, a couple of men are tasked with the grim cleanup. The severed arm is unceremoniously tossed overboard. Buckets of seawater are sloshed over the blood-soaked deck, the red swirling with the grime before draining away through the scuppers. Within minutes, the physical evidence of the surgery is mostly gone, but the psychic stain remains. You look at your own arms, your own legs. You are suddenly acutely aware of your own physical fragility. You are a collection of vulnerable limbs, a body that can be unmade with a saw and a hot piece of metal. The pirate's life, which once seemed like a path to freedom and riches, now seems like a high-stakes gamble with your own physical integrity. The price of failure is not just death, but a mutilation that is almost too horrific to contemplate. The smell of burnt flesh still hangs in the air, a ghostly reminder of what you have just witnessed. It is the perfume of pirate medicine, a ghastly mixture of blood, tar, rum, and fear. In the days following O'Malley's amputation, a pall of sickness and dread hangs over the ship. The bloody flux is still running its course, and the slow march of scurvy continues unabated. The ship is a floating infirmary, and every man is a patient in some stage of decay. In this atmosphere of widespread suffering, you start to notice the smaller, more personal battles being waged against illness. You begin to hear about the strange and varied cures and remedies that your shipmates use to treat their lesser ailments. This is the world of folk medicine, a rich tapestry of superstition, tradition, and occasionally accidental wisdom, with no real doctor and very little access to formal medical supplies. The pirates rely on a shared body of lore, a collection of bizarre and often disgusting treatments passed down from sailor to sailor. One morning, you see a man with a terrible toothache. His cheek is swollen, and he's been moaning for days. You watch as his friend treats him. The friend takes a rusty nail and heats it in the galley's fire until it's red hot. Then, with the suffering man's head held firmly, he quickly plunges the hot nail into the cavity of the rotten tooth. The man's scream is muffled, but the smell of burning tooth and enamel is sharp and distinct. The theory, such as it was to kill the worm in the tooth that was believed to be causing the pain. In reality, they were just destroying the nerve with heat. It was a brutal, agonizing cure that might provide temporary relief, but often lead to a worse infection in the shattered tooth. Another common complaint is constipation, a frequent side effect of the dry, fiberless diet of hardtack. The go-to remedy for this is a fearsome concoction known as a black draught. The ship's cook might keep a stash of senna leaves or other powerful herbal laxatives, which he would brew into a dark, bitter tea. This wasn't a gentle cure, it was a violent purge, designed to blast the system clear with explosive results. For cuts and scrapes that weren't serious enough for Silas's surgical attention, one of the most popular and strangest remedies was a salve made of chewed tobacco. A sailor would take a wad of his chewing tobacco, masticate it into a wet pulp, and then plaster it onto the wound as a poultice. This seems utterly bizarre to us, but there may be a tiny grain of science to it. Nicotine can be a vasoxantic, meaning it might have slightly reduced bleeding, and the sticky plug of tobacco would have kept the worst of the ship's filth out of the wound. Of course, it was also introducing the filth from the sailor's own mouth. This is where you encounter a particularly curious historical a bait, the weapon, salve, or powder of sympathy. This was a form of sympathetic magic popular in the 17th and early 18th centuries. The belief was that to heal a wound, you didn't treat the wound itself, you treated the weapon that caused it. So, if a man was cut with a sword, you would find the sword, clean it meticulously, and then apply a special salve to the blade. Meanwhile, the actual wound on the man would just be lightly wrapped in a clean cloth. Proponents of this method swore by its effectiveness. Historians and skeptics have a simple explanation: the powder of sympathy worked because it was the first widespread medical treatment that did nothing. By leaving the wound alone and keeping it relatively clean, the body was given its best possible chance to heal itself, free from the interference of doctors who would have otherwise probed it with dirty fingers or packed it with irritating substances. It was a form of accidental, placebo-controlled non-intervention. While it's unlikely your pirate crew is practicing this specific, rather sophisticated form of magical thinking, the principle highlights how often the cures of the day were worse than the disease. You also hear whispers of more esoteric remedies. A poultice of fresh dung might be applied to a burn, a practice that almost guaranteed a tetanus infection. To cure boils, a sailor might be advised to find a live frog and hold it against the sore until the frog died, the belief being that the frog would draw out the venom. For the terrible headaches that came with fever, a common treatment was to bind a rope tightly around the forehead, the idea being to physically squeeze the pain out. Another was to apply a plaster of pigeoned goat hair, a sticky, smelly mess that did nothing but irritate the skin. You see a man with a chest cold being treated with a tar water cordial. This was a drink made by stirring tar in water, letting it settle, and then drinking the water. It was a hugely popular panacea in the 18th century, promoted by the philosopher George Berkeley as a cure for everything from smallpox to scurvy. On the ship, it was just another foul-tasting drink that the men hoped would bring them some relief. Listening to and observing these desperate, often pathetic, attempts at healing, you realize that this is a world without a safety net. There is no science, no reliable medicine, no one who truly knows what they are doing. There is only pain, fear, and a collection of old wives' tales. The pirates, who seem so powerful and fearless when they are attacking a merchant ship, are rendered helpless and childlike by a tooth that or a chest cold. They are at the mercy of their own ignorance, trying to fight the complex failings of the human body with rusty nails, chewed tobacco, and blind faith. The days drag on in a haze of sickness and low morale. The ship itself seems to be suffering. The sails are patched, the ropes are frayed, and a general air of decay mirrors the state of the crew. You are one of the lucky ones, having survived the worst of the dysentery, and your scurvy has plateaued into a state of chronic, aching misery rather than acute decline. This gives you the dubious privilege of being able to observe the subtler effects of this environment on the men around you. The filth, you realize, is not just a physical burden, it's a poison for the mind. You see it in the way the men carry themselves. There's a slump to their shoulders, a dullness in their eyes. The boisterous, defiant energy you witnessed when you first joined the crew has evaporated, replaced by a sullen, irritable lethargy. Fights break out over the smallest provocations: a bumped elbow, a perceived slight in the grog line, an accusation of a stolen bit of hardtack. The violence is short-lived and pathetic, a flash of anger from men too weak to sustain a real conflict. The constant physical discomfort is a primary driver. When you are never clean, never free from itching, never without some dull ache in your joints or gut, your patience wears thin. Your world shrinks to the immediate sensations of your own body, and your tolerance for any external annoyance plummets. The men are not just sick, they are perpetually, profoundly uncomfortable, and it makes them mean. Then there is the effect of the filth itself on the human psyche. Living in a state of absolute squalor erodes a person's sense of self-worth. When you are treated like an animal, crammed into a filthy hold and forced to live in your own waste, you may begin to lose your sense of humanity. The daily rituals of life, which on land might reinforce a sense of order and dignity, are here replaced by a struggle for basic survival that is stripped of all grace. The act of eating is a battle with weevils. The act of sleeping is a battle with lice. The act of relieving oneself is a public and precarious ordeal. This constant degradation grinds away at a man's spirit. You notice a rise in what the sailors call melancholy, a deep, brooding sadness that can settle on a man and refuse to lift. You see men staring out at the empty ocean for hours, their faces blank masks of despair. Some retreat into themselves completely, barely speaking, performing their duties with a robotic emptiness. This is what we might now recognize as clinical depression, brought on by the combined pressures of physical illness, psychological stress, and the utter hopelessness of their situation. This is a point of fascinating debate for historians of psychology and maritime life. How did the pirate ethos of a short life and a merry one square with this grim reality? Some argue that the flamboyant, devil-may-care pirate persona was itself a coping mechanism, a form of psychological armor against the horrifying conditions they endured. The heavy drinking, the loud singing, the adoption of fierce nicknames and flags, all of it could be seen as a way to create a powerful, alternative identity to distract from the miserable reality of being a sick, filthy, and profoundly uncomfortable sailor. It was a performance of freedom and power in a life that was, in many ways, the opposite. Others argue that we romanticize this, and that for most, there was no grand psychological strategy. There was just misery. The turn to piracy was an economic and social decision, and the psychological consequences were simply endured, not managed. You also see the effects of long-term, low-grade malnutrition on cognitive function. The lack of essential vitamins and minerals doesn't just affect the body, it affects the brain. You notice men becoming forgetful, confused. Their judgment seems impaired. An order is given, and it is either misunderstood or forgotten minutes later. This brain fog, combined with the general lethargy, makes the crew inefficient and prone to dangerous mistakes. A rope isn't tied securely, a lookout isn't paying attention. On a sailing ship, these small mental lapses can lead to disaster. The squalor also breeds a kind of fatalism. When you are surrounded by death and decay, when you see your friends dying from invisible, incomprehensible forces, you may begin to feel that your own life is cheap. The willingness to engage in reckless, violent behavior during an attack might not just stem from a desire for plunder, but from a place of deep despair. If you believe you are likely to die soon from scurvy or flux anyway, why not risk dying in a blaze of glory? Death in battle might even seem preferable to the slow and dignified wasting away that you witness all around you. You are living in a psychological experiment on the effects of extreme environmental stress. The ship is a laboratory, and the hypothesis being tested is how much misery a human being can endure before they break. You see the evidence of that breaking all around you in the sudden flashes of violence, the vacant stares of the melancholic, and the general atmosphere of hopeless resignation. The dream of a free life has soured into the reality of a floating prison, where the bars are made not of iron, but of filth, disease, and despair. Just as the last vestiges of hope seem to have withered away, a cry comes from the lookout perched high on the mast sail hoe. The words are like a jolt of lightning through the listless crew. Men who were slumped in a stupor a moment ago are now on their feet, their eyes straining towards the horizon. A ship. It's a fat, slow-moving merchant vessel, low in the water, a clear sign that its hold is full. It's a prize. It's a chance. It's salvation. The transformation of the crew is astonishing. The lethargy, the melancholy, the despair, it all evaporates in the fire of adrenaline and avarice. The pirate awakens. The captain, himself weakened by the long voyage, barks orders with a renewed vigor. The few able-bodied men scramble up the rigging to unfurl more sails, their movements clumsy but determined. The sick and the lame, those who can still walk, drag themselves to the cannons. their faces grim with a predatory focus. This is the moment they have been waiting for, the sole purpose of their wretched existence. Your own heart pounds in your chest. The ache in your joints is forgotten. The foul taste in your mouth is replaced by the coppery tang of excitement. You are assigned to a cannon crew. Your job to help load the heavy iron balls and bags of gunpowder. The chase is surprisingly short. The merchant ship is a lumbering sheep, and your sloop, even in its sorry state, is a nimble wolf. You close the distance quickly. As you draw near, your captain orders the black flag to be raised. The Jolly Roger, with its dark skull and crossbones, snaps in the wind. It's a piece of psychological warfare, a symbol designed to strike terror into the hearts of the merchant crew and convince them to surrender without a fight. It works. After a single warning shot is fired across their bow, the merchant vessel's colors are struck. They surrender. The battle is over before it has even begun, a testament to the fearsome reputation the pirates have cultivated. The moments after the surrender are a flurry of organized activity. Grappling hooks are thrown, and the two ships are pulled alongside each other. The boarding party, a wild-looking group of men armed with pistols and cutlasses, swarms onto the deck of the prize. There is no resistance. The merchant crew, outnumbered and terrified, have locked themselves below deck. And then, the plunder begins. For the captain and the quartermaster, the main prize is the cargo and the hold, perhaps textiles, sugar, or tobacco. But for you and the rest of the crew, the immediate treasures are far more valuable. The first thing you go for is the water. You find the merchant ship's scuttlebutt, and when you lift the lid, the water inside is clear. You dip a ladle and undrink. It's cool and clean, without the swampy taste of algae. It's the most delicious thing you have ever tasted. Men weep with relief as they drink their fill, pouring the precious liquid over their heads, washing the salt and grime from their faces. Then, the food. The pirates storm the ship's galleon storerooms. They find barrels of apples and crates of onions. They find sacks of potatoes and even a few live chickens. To this crew, ravaged by scurvy, this is not food, this is medicine. It is life itself. You grab an apple, its skin red and shiny. You bite into it. The explosion of crisp, sweet, juicy flavor in your mouth is so intense it almost brings you to your knees. Your swollen gums protest, but you don't care. You devour it. And then another. You see men gnawing on onions and potatoes as if they were the finest delicacies. They instinctively understand, on some deep, primal level, that this is what their bodies have been screaming for. This is a point often overlooked in the grand tales of pirate treasure. While gold and silver were the ultimate goal, the most immediately impactful plunder was often the most mundane. For a crew on the brink of starvation and disease, a barrel of fresh water and a sack of fruit were worth more than all the jewels in the world. Historians studying the logistics of piracy note that these victualling stops, whether by plunder or by landing on a tropical island, were absolutely essential. A pirate crew could not survive for long without them. Their operational range was limited not by the speed of their ship, but by the decay of their supplies in their own bodies. You find a sea chest belonging to one of the merchant ship's officers. You break it open. Inside, there are no coins, but there is something just as good: clean clothes. A simple linen shirt, a pair of woolen breeches. They are clean, dry, and free of lice. You strip off your own foul, rotting garments, the second skin you've been wearing for months, and put on the new clothes. The sensation of soft, clean fabric against your skin is a forgotten luxury, a moment of pure, transcendent bliss. The ship is transformed. The mood is ecstatic. Men are laughing, singing, and feasting. The grim, silent vessel of a few hours ago is now a scene of wild celebration. The immediate effect of the fresh food is almost miraculous, while it will take time for the scurvy to fully recede. The psychological boost is instantaneous. Hope has been restored. You stand on the deck of the captured ship, an apple in one hand, a clean shirt on your back. For the first time in a long time, you feel something other than misery. You feel a glimmer of the merry life you were promised. It is a fleeting, temporary victory, bought with the terror of others. But right now, in this moment of pure, sensual relief, it feels like everything. The euphoria of the plunder lasts for a few weeks. The fresh food runs out quickly, but its effects linger. The worst symptoms of scurvy begin to recede. Gums harden, old wounds stay closed, and a semblance of strength returns to the crew's limbs. The ship feels alive again, but the sea is a harsh mistress, and good fortune is a fleeting visitor. The voyage drags on, the search for another prize is fruitless, and the familiar specter of hunger begins to loom once more. The last of the plundered apples is a distant, sweet memory. The hardtack barrel is empty. The last cask of salted meat, when opened, is found to be a black, putrid mush, and is cast overboard with a string of curses. The ship is out of food. The first days are manageable. Hunger is a dull ache, a familiar discomfort. The daily grog ration helps to numb the stomach and the mind. But as the days turn into a week, the ache becomes a sharp, gnawing pain. The lethargy returns, but this time it's different. It's not the weary apathy of scurvy, it's the light-headed, predatory weakness of starvation. Tempers fray again, but the men are too weak for real fights. They can only snarl and glare at each other, their eyes sunken, their cheekbones sharp. All of the ship's remaining resources are consumed. The last of the chickens, which had been so prized, are long gone. The men chew on scraps of leather, old shoes, anything to give their jaws something to do and trick their stomachs into feeling full. They boil the leather to make a foul, gelatinous broth that provides almost no nutrition but feels like a meal. Then, their eyes turn to the other inhabitants of the ship, the rats. The same creatures that were once a reviled pest, a symbol of filth and disease, now become a source of hope. They are the last moving source of protein on this floating prison. The hunt begins. It is not a sport this time, but a deadly serious business of survival. The crew, armed with clubs and nets, stalk the lower decks. The rats, sensing the shift in the power dynamic, become more cunning, more elusive. When a rat is finally cornered and killed, it is a moment of grim triumph. The creature is skinned and gutted with the same knives the cook uses for everything else. Its tiny carcass is then roasted over the fire or tossed into a pot of boiling seawater to make a thin, greasy soup. You offered a piece. It's a small, stringy leg, charred black from the fire. Your stomach churns with a mixture of revulsion and ravenous hunger. You haven't eaten a solid piece of protein in over a week. You take it. You close your eyes and you eat it. The taste is gum-eye and unpleasant, but it is meat. It is sustenance. It silences the gnawing emptiness in your belly for a little while. This act of eating rats is a well-documented reality of sea voyages gone wrong. For navies, merchants, and pirates alike, it represents the crossing of a significant ecological boundary. It is the ultimate admission of failure and desperation. To eat the vermin that infest your home is to sink to their level, to become part of the cycle of decay rather than its master. Historians who study survival at sea often debate the stages of starvation. After exhausting the official rations, crews would turn to unconventional sources: leather, candle tallow, and then the ship's pests. The final, most horrific stage was, of course, cannibalism. While pirate lore is filled with macabre tales, authenticated instances of cannibalism among pirates are actually quite rare, certainly rarer than among shipwrecked sailors of merchant or naval vessels. The custom of the sea drawing lots to determine who would be sacrificed was a feature of survival situations, not piracy. Why the difference? One theory is that pirate crews were inherently less stable. In a true starvation scenario, a pirate crew might be more likely to mutiny, disintegrate into violent factions, or simply abandon their voyage before reaching that final, desperate stage. Their social contract was built on profit, not long-term survival against the odds. As you chew the last stringy morsel of meat from the tiny bone, you look at the men around you. Their faces are gaunt. Their eyes have a feral gleam. They are no longer just pirates, rogues, or rebels. They are starving animals. The thin veneer of their self-proclaimed freedom and democracy has been stripped away by hunger, revealing the raw, primal instinct to survive at any cost. The social structure of the ship begins to break down. The quartermaster still rations the grog, but his authority is thin. Men eye each other with suspicion. Who is hoarding a hidden crust of biscuit, who is a better rat-catcher? Alliances are formed and broken over a shared rat carcass. The ship is adrift, both literally and metaphorically. The wind has died, and you are becalmed in the sweltering, oppressive heat of the doldrums. The sails hang limp. The sea is a flat, metallic sheet. There is nothing to do but lie in the scant shade. Conserve your energy. Then wait. Wait for a wind. Wait for a sail on the horizon. Or wait for the slow, agonizing end. The hunger is a constant, maddening companion. A fire in your gut that consumes all thought, all hope, all humanity. You are no longer dreaming of gold, you are dreaming of a single, weevil-free biscuit. You are lying on the deck, your back against the warm wood, staring up at the limp sails. The sun beats down relentlessly. The world has been reduced to a few simple, brutal truths: the heat, the thirst, and the hollow, aching emptiness in your stomach. The desperate flurry of rat hunting has subsided as the rats themselves have become scarce and cunning. The ship is quiet, a lethargic, sun-baked silence broken only by the groans of the thirsty and the maddening creak of the ship's timbers. In this state of near total deprivation, a strange clarity begins to settle in your mind. All the stories, all the promises that lured you to this life, now seem like a fever dream. You think back to that smoky tavern, to the pirate with the silver coins and the toothy grin. He spoke of liberty, of riches, of a merry life. He sold you a fantasy, and you, in your desperation, bought it completely. Where is that liberty now? You are more trapped than you have ever been in your life. You are the prisoner on this floating plank, chained by the vast, empty expanse of the ocean. You are a slave to the wind, to the currents, and to the desperate need for your next sip of water, your next mouthful of food. The rigid hierarchy of the Navy or the merchant service has been replaced by the brutal democracy of starvation, where every man is your competitor for the last drop, the last crumb. And the riches you laugh, the dry, rasping sound that hurts your throat. You have seen plunder. Yes, you have held fine silks and seen chests of silver. But what good is it now? You cannot eat silver. You cannot drink gold. The treasure that was captured is locked away in the captain's cabin, a useless, glittering hoard guarded by men who are as weak and thirsty as you are. The true treasure, the only treasure that matters, is a barrel of fresh water, a sack of potatoes, a crate of apples, the things that your former life, for all its poverty and hardship, provided in relative abundance. You now understand a fundamental truth that the grand pirate legends conveniently omit. For the famous pirate captains, the Blackbeards, the Calico Jacks, the Black Bart's piracy could indeed be a path to immense wealth and notoriety. They were the CEOs of this violent enterprise. They skimmed the best of the loot. They commanded fleets, and their names became immortal. But for the vast majority of the crew, for the common sailor, for a man like you, piracy was not a get-rich-quick scheme. It was a high-risk, low-reward gamble. This is a point that modern historians of piracy, like Marcus Riddica, have emphasized. They argue that we should see the common pirate not as a swashbuckling adventurer, but as a marginalized laborer. A rebel against an incredibly exploitative and brutal maritime labor system. His turn to piracy was an act of defiance, but it rarely led to a life of leisure. The average pirate's career was incredibly short, often lasting only a year or two before he was captured, killed in battle, or dead from disease, accident, or starvation. The treasure a common pirate received, even after a successful capture, was often not a chest of gold doubloons. It was a few pieces of eight, a new set of clothes, a good pair of pistols. It was enough to live riotously for a few weeks in a pirate haven like Nassau or Port Royal, spending it all on drink and pleasure. But it was rarely enough to retire, to buy land, to build a new life. It was just enough to keep you in the game, to lure you back for one more voyage, one more roll of the dice. For most, the ultimate prize was not wealth, but simply staying alive long enough to spend their meager share. The real treasure was survival itself. You look at the men lying around you on the deck, their bodies gaunt, their skin cracked by the sun. These are not the merry rogues of the stories. They are not the romantic heroes of the sea. They are broken men. They are factory workers from a floating factory whose product is violence, and they have been ground down by the machinery of their own profession. They fled the tyranny of the merchant captain's whip only to submit to the far more brutal tyranny of scurvy, dysentery, and starvation. The black flag, the symbol of their supposed freedom, now seems like a cruel joke. It represents not their liberty, but their isolation. They have declared war on the entire world, and in doing so, they have cut themselves off from all sources of aid, all ports of call, all hope of rescue. They are utterly, terrifyingly alone. A weak cheer goes up from the bow. A man is pointing, his hand trembling. A decline on the horizon. Clouds, rain. Salvation, once again, comes not from a treasure map, but from the sky. As the first fat drops of rain begin to fall, you and the other men stir, a frantic energy returning to your wasted bodies. You spread out sails to catch the water. You hold up your open mouths to the heavens. The water is clean. It is fresh. It is life. The rain will not solve the problem of hunger, but it solves the more immediate problem of thirst. It buys you time, and as you drink the cool, life-giving rain, you realize that your entire existence has been stripped down to these elemental victories. The treasure is not the gold in the hold, it is the rain in your mouth. Survival is the only prize that matters. The rain came, and with it, a wind that filled the sails and broke the ship free from the stagnant grip of the doldrums. The immediate crisis of thirst was over, but the deep, gnawing hunger remained. The ship, pushed by the new wind, sailed on, a vessel of ghosts powered by the last dregs of human will. Your journey as a pirate, your scent, is nearing its end. It will not conclude with a climactic battle or the discovery of a treasure island, but with a slow, grinding dissolution. One dawn, you are woken by a different kind of shout from the lookout. Not sail ho, but land ho. You drag your weakened body to the rail and stare. On the horizon is a smudge of green, the first land you've seen in what feels like an eternity. As you draw closer, you can make out a protected bay, a sandy beach, and the lush, verdant green of a tropical island. It's not a bustling port, but a quiet, uninhabited cove. It's a place to recuperate, or a place to die. The anchor is dropped with a splash and a rattle of chain that seems to echo in the profound silence of the bay. The ship has stopped. The voyage is over. For now, you and the other survivors, a fraction of the crew that set out with such boisterous hope, are ferried ashore in the longboat. The moment your bare feet touch the solid, warm sand, a wave of dizziness washes over you. The land feels strange, unnerving still after so many months of the sea's constant motion. You stumble, your land legs yet to be found. The island is a paradise of the senses, a stark contrast to the floating hell you have just left. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, of flowering plants, of living things. It's so rich and clean it almost makes you choke. You can hear the sound of birds, the hum of insects, the gentle rustle of palm fronds in the breeze. It's a symphony of life after the monotonous silence of the sea. The first priority is food and water. The clear, fresh stream is found trickling down from the hills. You drink from it, the water so cold and pure, it feels like a sacrament. The men then disperse, foraging like the starving animals they are. They find coconuts, digging at the husks with their knives. They find wild yams and other roots. They discover trees heavy with strange, wonderful fruits. You eat greedily the sweet, vibrant flesh, a shocking delight to your long-deprived palate. For the next few days, you do nothing but eat and sleep. The crew, which had been on the verge of turning on itself, is now united in the simple, communal act of survival. The social contract, frayed to the breaking point at sea, is slowly being rewoven on land. There is no talk of plunder, no mention of the next voyage. There is only the present moment, the profound relief of a full belly in solid ground beneath your feet. This is the cycle of pirate life that is so often ignored. The periods of intense action and plunder were punctuated by long, quiet periods of recovery, hiding, and ship maintenance. This is where a crew would careen their ship, scraping the hull free of the worms and barnacles that were destroying it. It was a time to mend sails, repair rigging, and allow the men to recover from the ravages of the voyage. As you regain some of your strength, you have time to reflect. You look back at the ship, your former prison, now anchored peacefully in the turquoise water. It looks smaller, shabbier, than you remembered. From this distance, you can see its flaws, its scars, the general air of decay that hangs about it. It is not a vessel of freedom, but a tool of a desperate and brutal trade. You look at your own body. You are emaciated, your skin covered in a patchwork of sores, bites, and bruises. Your teeth are loose, your joints still ache. You carry the map of your journey on your own flesh. The filth of the ship is ingrained in you, a smell and a feeling you fear you will never be able to wash away. You have survived, but you are not whole. You are scarred, physically and mentally, by the experience. Historians often debate the ultimate fate of the average pirate. Few died rich, many were captured and hanged. Their bodies often displayed in gibbetess at harbor entrances as a warning to others. Many more simply disappeared, their unrecorded deaths at sea attributed to storms, starvation, or disease. A lucky few may have taken their meager shares and successfully reintegrated into society, living out their lives as quiet farmers or fishermen, their past a dark secret they never spoke of. What will be your fate as you sit on that warm, sandy beach? The future is a blank page. The pirate crew will eventually recover. The captain will once again speak of riches and glory. The call of the sea, of the only life you now know, will be strong. But you have seen behind the curtain. You know the reality behind the myth. You know the true cost of the black flag. The journey has not brought you riches or glory. It has brought you an intimate, horrifying knowledge of the depths of human misery. You have learned about the fragility of the body, the tyranny of hunger, the psychological poison of filth. You have learned that the most valuable treasures in the world are not gold or silver, but a clean shirt, a piece of fruit, and a drink of fresh water. Your pirate voyage is over. The ship will sail again, but a part of you will forever remain on this island. The ghost of the naive young man who walked out of a tavern so long ago, chasing a dream. The rest of you, the survivor, carries the foul taste and the lingering stench of that dream with you. It is a part of you now, a story written in scars, a lesson learned in the stinking, wretched classroom of a pirate's ship. The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across the sand. The gentle lapping of the waves on the shore is a soft, rhythmic whisper, a lullaby at the edge of the world. You are lying on the warm earth, feeling its solid, unwavering presence beneath you. The aches in your body are still there, but they are dull, distant echoes now, muffled by the profound peace of this place. The air grows cooler, and the scent of night blooming flowers begins to drift down from the jungle. A sweet, clean perfume that washes away the last phantom smells of tar and bilge. You close your eyes. The journey you have just taken fades, its sharp edges blurring, its harsh sounds softening into a distant murmur. The faces of the crew, the grimace of Silas, the vacant stare of the scurvy-ridden, they all recede, becoming like figures in a half-remembered dream. You are no longer on that ship. You are here. In this moment of quiet safety, your hammock is no longer a swinging, greasy piece of canvas, but a soft, still bed of sand and leaves. The only sounds are the gentle hum of the island and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. You feel a sense of heaviness settling over your limbs, but it is not the leaden weight of sickness or despair. It is the pleasant, welcome weight of sleep. You are drifting now, floating on a calm, quiet sea, far away from the horrors of your voyage. The darkness behind your eyelids is peaceful, the soft, velvety curtain drawing close to the day. The story is over. The struggle is done. There is only rest now, deep and dreamless. The end of the article. Good night.